Life can be difficult. Whether it's school, work, home, trying to make a video in a timely manner, life always finds a means of getting in the way. Although this is true for pretty much anyone, it can get very easy to feel as though you're the only one suffering, as though nobody can understand the pain you're going through, wondering why the world has decided to punish you and solely you for canceling your $10 subscription to Netflix because there were too many ads. I still cannot believe that's real. Now, where am I going with this? To be honest, I'm not really sure either. Just like this intro, I've lost all direction. I'm aimlessly wandering through this thing we call life, searching for a light that keeps me going. And it was during this completely hopeless stroll that I stumbled into the world of television. Well, television in the sense that I'm watching from a monitor. And it was on this masterpiece of an invention that I found what is perhaps one of, if not the greatest pieces of media to ever be produced. A little South Korean drama known as Death's Game. Interestingly enough, Death's Game was actually released in the same week as Night Has Come. Well, pretty much. And their ratings on my drama list are almost identical, which is honestly a disservice to God. This series was adapted from the manhwa/webtoon of the same name, created by Lee Won-sik and illustrated by Go-chan. The producer, screenwriter, and director of this production is also a fairly new face in the industry. Ha Byung-hoon only has 4 credits to his name, with Death's Game being his most recent. I hope that's only because he's still in the middle of other productions. This show also stars 2 pretty well-known faces, one of whom being Seo In-guk, a Korean actor who pretty much has been in every single K-drama under the sun. Like, damn bro, calm down, your career too clean. Little fun fact, your boy avoided mandatory military service by breaking his legs. Not on purpose, at least I don't think so, he just had a medical condition I don't even know how to pronounce. He was also in a BuzzFeed video a while ago, so his career's been going crazy. His co-star, Park So-dam, also has a mountain of credits to her name, including starring as Cinderella. For some reason, I didn't expect anyone outside of the US to know about Cinderella, despite it originating in a Greek tale. She was also in that one movie called Parasite, but I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. And alongside an entire cast of Korean actors, there's also a single Canadian dude, a Giga Chad known only as Joshua Newton. He seems to be an actor working in Korea, which explains his resume, and he also looks a lot like Mr. Fantastic. Now, I'm not going to summarize the synopsis this time because I think the first episode does an incredible job at setting up the stakes and plot of this story. However, I do want to mention with my voice that this show gets dark. In my opinion, far darker than Night Has Come. Not because of the visual horrors we may witness, but due to the themes we'll be exploring. Not to sound like an English teacher here, but these are themes I'd like everyone to be thinking about, even if for a second, as they can quite literally change the way you see life. I'll be passing out a worksheet to help you guys follow along, and I expect to see them finish with thoughtful and dedicated answers, no less than 10 sentences if you want full credit. Now then, put those phones away, unless you're watching this video on them. Put on those thinking caps and set your ears to listening mode. And without further ado, let us all strap our seatbelts and soar straight into the absolutely beautiful, emotional, twisted, and heartwarming tale that is Death's Game.
Let's go やめちゃえそうやなことなんて全速力回避せよ G baby 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 G baby 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 瞳ごとな心つれつれ一縮だわチクタクチクタクタイムラインが気持ちを沈めてくもう溺れちゃいそうよもう手遅れかもよ嘘ちゃんと連れ出しておやった神社本当はノーノーノーノーノーやっぱめちゃめちゃ気になるおおおおお
We open the story on a man who's trapped in a dark and quite gloomy room. He panics, cries, screams, wonders what he's done in his life to be sent here of all places. As this happens, a lady slowly approaches him, giving him the only explanation he should need. He's here because he is guilty of seeking her before she sought him. She cocks her gun, aims it at him, and pulls the trigger. And in the next moment, he's tossed out of a plane as the narrator states his only desire, to have died a clean and peaceful death. We then cut back to 7 years prior to watch our well-dressed and giddy protagonist exit a subway. This here is Choi Yee-Jae, and as we listen in on his conversation with his girlfriend, Lee Ji-soo, we learn that he is currently on his way to an important job interview at a company known as Taikang, which he secured despite not having graduated university yet. Side note, for those of you curious, I do believe Taikang is a parody of the Taekwon Group, which is a real South Korean conglomerate, just so you know what we're dealing with here. On the phone, Yee-Jae acts optimistic, but it's really only to sound modest. In reality, he's quite conceited. He doesn't believe he can land this job. He knows he'll land it. After all, he has to, because what worth does his life have if not this job? Things seem to be going really well, as though this day was meant to honor a bright and talented young man. A crowd gathers around as Yee-Jae attempts to keep this man conscious, but then he grabs onto his sleeve and inches closer to his face. It looks as though he wants to say something, anything, but his time on this planet has unfortunately come to an end. Panicked, Yee-Jae desperately forces the man's hand away, trying to keep both his mind and suit intact. But in the next scene, we can see that the trauma of witnessing death followed him all the way to the interview. A judge, yes, for some reason this job interview is ran by like a couple of judges, asks Yee-Jae a question, but he wasn't even listening. He politely asks for the question to be repeated, and the judge responds by moving on to the next applicant, who answers it immediately. We then hear the narrator, who is Yee-Jae, explain how he believed that this one singular moment not only affected his interview, but his chances at success for the next 7 years. After failing the interview, he was forced to work many odd jobs, fighting to simply secure funds to pay his bills and the mountain of student loans he's racked up. This was made only more challenging after a certain virus swept the nation, as finding a job became even more difficult. Yes, it's canon in this story. What made everything even worse was having to be told that there were still so many opportunities by people who wouldn't understand his situation, having to watch everyone around him succeed while he faced constant rejection, not to mention that feeling of just being all alone. He still had his girlfriend, but clearly it wasn't enough to lift his spirits. However, there was a single light in what felt like a never-ending tunnel, because after 7 long and painful years, he once again found himself in the very same place where it all began, as a finalist to a job at Taikang. It's unknown what exactly changed. Perhaps positions started opening up again due to certain global changes, or they're just interviewing to fuck with him like almost every job is right now. Regardless, he sits alone in a room of 3 judges this time. 2 read off his qualifications and past job experiences, only to laugh. What desperate soul would list part-time work in their resume for a high-end position? Well, I can tell you one person who unironically listed YouTube in the resume 1 or 2 or maybe 100 times. However, the others quickly go quiet as the center judge decides to take the stage. Once he speaks, everyone must only listen. He not only reads Yee-Jae like an open book, but he also reads his file. Yee-Jae lost his father when he was only 5, which to him is why he works so hard. Sounds more like an insult than a compliment, honestly. Though, despite running all over the place, Yee-Jae was still incredibly able to obtain a substantial number of certificates and licenses.
멋있어요.
Yee-Jae leaves the interview room in very high spirits. It felt as though life might finally start going his way, but just as this happens, he gets a call from a friend who asks him a simple yet concerning question.
야, 최희재, 너도 현수한테 투자했냐?
어?
I shit you not when I say Yee-Jae has gotten rug pulled, and I do mean the cryptocurrency kind of rug pull. He rushes to his quote-unquote friend's apartment, aggressively pounding on the door and demanding answers. He even attempts to destroy it completely with a fire extinguisher, but it breaks apart like Lego bricks. But the friend never answers. For all he knows, he probably already left the country, and Yee-Jae has no choice but to leave with empty pockets and an empty bank account. He does go to the police station to report the incident, but all they tell him is just sucks to suck. Yee-Jae then makes his way to Lee's house, presumably to just be with her in his most vulnerable moment, only to see her step out of a car and receive a bouquet of flowers from another man. Rub salt on the wound, why don't you? He angrily approaches her, and she too seems angry that he's shown up unannounced and quite obviously drunk. This conversation gives us insight into how their relationship has progressed in the last 7 years. It's gotten quite rocky due to the decline in Yee-Jae's mental health, and it sounds as though Lee's tried her best to encourage him, motivate him, cheer him up as any good partner would, but Yee-Jae simply always refuses to listen because he is stubborn. Lee offers him money just to pay his bills on time, seeing as how he had to skip jobs just to attend all of those Taikang interviews. And yet Yee-Jae continues to complain, continues the argument. Yee-Jae doesn't even give her a chance to explain the bouquet before ending the relationship, believing it's become nothing more than a burden for both of them, and he has basically no idea what to really do from here.
아니 오빠는 더 열심히 살아야겠다는 생각은 안 들어? 언제까지 이렇게 살 건데?
This question sets Yee-Jae off completely, and honestly rightfully so. The man has been busting his ass every single day, all because of a situation he had no control over. I mean, had that guy not just randomly run out into the street for no reason, or if the driver had stopped in time, or if he had just landed somewhere else, everything could have turned out perfectly fine. Life could have felt actually worth living. Yee-Jae hands her back the money and heads back quote-unquote home in the pouring rain. But the pain refuses to stop. His landlord has evicted him due to overdue rent and thrown out all of his belongings, uncaring of what would happen to them in this weather. And as the final nail in the coffin, he receives a text in the morning, informing him that he's failed the final interview at Taikang. Upon gazing at a picture of himself from 7 years ago, he breaks down in tears. He's devastated that literally everything in his life has gone wrong, that he couldn't and never will succeed despite all of his efforts. In the next moment, we see him standing atop a building's ledge, gazing upon the shining lights of a bustling city. He takes a quick look at a billboard of Kyohak University, boasting its achievement at being #1 in employment rate, as though the world was just mocking him even further. Yee-Jae can no longer take this pain. He leaves a note beside him, held down by his phone, and with full intentions of taking his own life. After all, death is merely a means of ending the pain he is currently in. As soon as he leans forward, he receives a call from his mother. Unfortunately, however, it is already too late, and Choi Yee-Jae is dead.
뭐지? 나 죽은 건가? 왜 이렇게 어두워? 어? 눈에 이건 뭐지?
Despite having just jumped off a building seconds ago, Yee-Jae has suddenly found himself inside of a private jet. I guess God no longer sends angels to collect your soul, he just gets you a one-way flight on Spirit Airlines. As Yee-Jae continues to examine his surroundings, he spots a strange image on the tablet in front of him. He picks it up and brings it closer to his face? That is not Choi Yee-Jae, but instead some random guy we've never seen before. And soon an explanation comes in the form of a girl who appears to be perfectly dressed for this situation. She sits there, reading Yee-Jae's final note out loud, which casually insults death any chance it gets, before smiling and greeting him by burning it. This lady reveals herself to be death in the flesh, as well as letting Yee-Jae know that he is, in fact, dead. She removes her glasses and uses her Sharingan to take him back to just moments before, when they met at the border between Earth and Hell, the Borderlands. Yee-Jae in Borderlands. Death stopped him here as he was on his way to Hell in order to punish him for his sins and mocking her. Sounds more like she was just getting petty. And this punishment will come in the form of a game where he must enter the bodies of 12 different people, all of whom are facing imminent death, and each being more painful than the last. However, there is a silver lining. If he does somehow manage to avoid death in any of the bodies, he's allowed to keep on living, and he'll be allowed to go to heaven once he meets a natural death. Meaning if he avoids whatever death awaits this rich ass dude, he'll be bawling for years to come. Yee-Jae is initially against the idea. After all, he jumped off the building because he no longer wanted to live. He just wanted life to be over with. Well, as death leaves, he gets that chance yet again. A thunderstorm suddenly overtakes the cloudy sky. He's about to experience a whole bunch of turbulence. Everybody strap your seatbelts. The flight attendant rushes in, attempting to calm Yee-Jae down, but he refuses, because as Death stated, he knows this is the end.
좌석 벨트 표시등이 꺼졌습니다.
Or, I guess not. Like, calm down, bro, it's just a prank. Yee-Jae decides to go exploring and gets to see firsthand just how rich this dude is. Like, damn, bro, who are you trying to flex on in here? The flight attendants? The pilot? Yourself? I like to think the guy knew someone else was gonna take over his body, so he displayed only the best of the best here. As he does so, a strange crystal appears and flies directly into his head, causing a montage of memories to flood his mind. Yee-Jae has taken over the body of Park Jin Jin-tae, the second son of Taiking's CEO and who is also a parody of every rich person on earth.
적은 당연히 모든 집에는 수영장과 정원이 있고 남들도 전용기 세대쯤은 다 가지고 있다고 생각하며 자랐다.
We also learned that he's been chosen to inherit the company over his brother, who is the guy we saw interview Yee-Jae earlier. And that brings us right back to this very moment. Realizing his situation and believing he had just survived death only seconds ago, Yee-Jae changes his mind about this game and celebrates his newfound paradise. Well, that didn't last very long. And with that, life number 1 has come to an end. As Yee-Jae sits there, both confused and angry, Def goes on to explain the intricacies of the game. Park Jin-tae is, in fact, dead, and what we witness is pretty much how he died. Yee-Jae was basically put into his body just seconds before, as is customary for this punishment. Essentially, imagine yourself playing a video game and creating a save state just before you go into a boss fight. Yee-Jae was essentially put in that last save. Yee-Jae questions the absurdity of the situation. After all, how is he supposed to even survive a plane crash, let alone an explosion? But Def only explains that it is his job to figure that out. And she also visually reminds him what awaits him if he fails to survive any of the 12 lives. And it's after he witnesses the horrors that await him do we see the opening scene once again. And this time we understand the context, the stakes, and the despair our protagonist feels. Yee-Jae questions what he's ever done to deserve such a punishment. And the answer is simple. His sin was seeking death before death sought him. Yee-Jae is determined to survive, even if only to avoid having to spend an eternity in hell. And so, Death retrieves her gun, puts a bullet in the chamber, aims it at him, and fires, starting the next life. You know what? Maybe hell ain't so bad. As Yee-Jae pleads for help from his neighboring skydivers, the memory crystal appears and speeds towards him. He has taken over the body of Song Jae-sup, an extreme stuntman who's always lived life on the edge. And now he's attempting his most death-defying stunt yet. A live-streamed 8,000 feet freefall. No parachute. His only method of survival is a safety net at the very bottom. If he succeeds, he'll earn $3 billion US. The things people do for clout, bro. And that takes us back to this very moment. Armed with the skills and confidence of the previous owner, Yee-Jae lets go of his body pillow and pushes onward, relieving the stress of his camera crew here, who were probably shitting their pants thinking they were about to film a man's death. Yee-Jae looks for the supposed safety net. He quickly finds it. He aims towards it. He's right on the mark. He'll land safely. He'll survive and start life once again with $3 billion. I do genuinely wonder if this would have been possible, though I'd prefer if nobody ever attempted it. Anyways, I have to say that this is personally one of my favorite pilot episodes ever. The first reason has to do with our protagonist. He's introduced as someone we, the audience, can all relate to. A person who is simply trying to get his life started, who uses all of those skills he's acquired to potentially land what can be considered his dream job. Not just to make himself happy or prove that he's successful, but also for the sake of those who he loves. However, uncontrollable circumstances just slap him around at every turn, never giving him a break and forcing him down this depressive spiral. Though from there the path would deviate, as others would either continue powering through these obstacles, while there will be some who see death as the only way out. The first almost half of this episode is dedicated to nothing but Yee-Jae. It helps us connect with him, see him as not just a character, but a human being, with his own thoughts, his own experiences, his own personality that shapes the decisions he makes later on. And we still have so much room for character development because, I mean, it's really not possible to go any lower than this. Speaking of characters, I want to briefly mention something I noticed while making this video. Death is personified as a girl, though it's just a form that they take to speak with humans who end up in this same scenario. But honestly, I think it also just symbolizes how others like Yee-Jae view death. They don't see it as this thing that should always be feared and never quote-unquote sought, but instead, it's just a cute girl. And because they weren't afraid of death, they didn't think twice before just taking their own lives. This episode also does a pretty good job at explaining the plot. No need for long-winded explanations or constant additions because the writer is afraid that the viewer will click off if they don't understand literally everything in the first 10 seconds. It just gives us a bare-bones rundown and will answer any questions we may have later on. In case you're curious, the skydiver life is actually an original for this adaptation. In the webtoon, Yee-Jae's second life was that of a dude in the middle of a torture session. Same outcome for both in almost the same time frame, but I think skydiving was a lot more fun. That's really about all I can say so far since we've only just begun, but since I did so with Night Has Come, I'll also review each episode individually. Death's Game episode 1, titled Death, receives a solid 10 skulls out of 10 from me. There is seriously very little I can find wrong with this episode, besides maybe the protagonist screaming a little one too many times, but that really doesn't have any impact on the story. I mean, hey, if I were thrown into this exact same situation, I'd probably be shitting my pants as well. This episode opens with a monochromatic scene depicting a crime involving the death of two civilians. We don't know the identities of either, but thanks to Curious George over here, we do at least know that one of them is female. That, alongside a photo of Yee-Jae, leads us to wonder if one of these victims was Lee Ji-soo, Yee-Jae's ex-girlfriend. Though I guess it'd be a little strange for her to carry around the photo when the last time we saw her she had supposedly found herself another man. Could he have been the second victim and Yee-Jae the murderer? Anyways, Yee-Jae wakes up once again in the borderland, with his second life now over. He angrily questions death yet again. How is he meant to survive now two literally inevitable deaths? Though death refuses to give a concrete answer. Desperate, Yee-Jae apologizes, hoping it'd get him out of this ridiculous punishment, though that too doesn't work. And before Yee-Jae can really complain anymore, she puts the gun to his head and fires.
뭐야? 학교잖아. 거울 어딨어?
Yee-Jae finds himself in the body of a high school boy, and sitting just to his left is another student watching the death of his previous life. I didn't know South Korea had Live Leak too. Just before Yee-Jae smacks the shit out of him for laughing, the memory crystal suddenly appears, and it honestly looks like it speeds up to prevent him from screwing himself over. Yee-Jae has taken over the life of Kwon Hyuk-soo, an unfortunate boy with an overworked mother, deceased father, and high aspirations, but with one of the worst social lives in existence. He gets tortured on a daily basis by the same weirdo we just saw seconds ago. Not bullied, this is straight up torture. After having taken enough abuse, he comes to a final decision. If Goodwill Kyung-jun over here bullies him again, he'll jump off the roof of the school.
너가 뒤진다고 누가 알아줄 것 같아? 손 내려.
Kwon leaves a note and makes his way to the rooftop, which brings us back to the present day. Yee-Jae stops himself, believing it's best to avoid confrontation at this moment. That's when he realizes something. If Kwon's death was due to suicide, then so long as he doesn't go through with it, he'll be completely fine. Well, so long as you ignore the torture, which Yee-Jae unfortunately doesn't.
뭘 쪼개고 처앉아있을 병신 같은 새끼가 내가 딸기우유 사오라고 했지. 아우 돌대가리 새끼 진짜.
I really like the transitions to OG Yee-Jae in this small fight scene, and it really goes to show that he currently gives zero fucks about who he is to the eyes of others. It's also really cool to see how they filmed this all in one take, just constantly flipping around. But it does make me wonder, where the hell did Yee-Jae pull these moves from? I didn't know white-collared workers could fight like that. Usually they just sit behind a desk. But just before Yee-Jae lands a good finishing blow, someone else joins in and slaps him around instead, ending with him just eating punches. And the only only reason they stop is because the teacher returns. This explanation isn't included in the adaptation, but if you're curious as to why Yee-Jae doesn't just tell the teacher of the abuse, the webtoon shows a memory of Kwon doing that exact thing. However, the apology he received was fake, while the ass beating was quite real. Anyway, after school, Yee-Jae is taken to the gym to continue his daily torture. And although Jin-sung, which is Goodwill Kyung-jun's real name, wants to continue, the dude from earlier stops him. This is not Tae-sok. Sock or suck?
나태섭.
This is not Tae-sok. Jeez, it doesn't sound right either. Oh my god. Anyways, this is Na, someone who, despite his strength, is still tossed around like an errand boy. The only one who's actually able to stop Jin-sung was a girl who literally made him fold under zero pressure. And Yee-Jae is thankful that someone would go out of their way just to save him.
뭘 봐 병신아.
Never mind, I guess everyone is evil in South Korean high schools. Yee-Jae heads to Kwon's home, where he learns that they actually aren't very different from each other. A man raised by a hard-working single mother and just trying to aim higher in life. Just trying to make their sacrifices worth something. We then get to see him have a meal with Kwon's mother, who gives him an extra slice of meat because his life is far more valuable than hers. Yee-Jae can't help but be reminded of his own mother and her comforting smile despite everything he knew she was going through. In this moment, Yee-Jae sort of regrets leaving so soon, without so much as even saying goodbye. He doesn't want to revert the decision he made, but he does at least want to see his mother one last time, perhaps to just deliver his final message in person. He sits in Kwon's room and attempts to build up the courage to call her, only to receive a message from Jin-sung demanding 50,000 won by tomorrow. Yee-Jae snaps out of it, remembering that he is technically no longer alive and a completely different person at this moment. He can't be thinking about the life he previously had because he needs to focus on the life he is currently living. And this involves quote-unquote beating Jin-sung, just as revenge for Kwon. The plan? Recruit Na by essentially rage baiting him, which looks to be working until Jin-sung enters the game, after which he just goes back to being a little shy boy.
하자.
Jin-sung promises to fuck Kwon, not like that, before taking care of his indigestion, giving him and Na the perfect chance to leave. Yee-Jae continues to pester Na, wondering how he could let himself be bossed around by him, of all people. And that's when he reveals that the moment he so much as scowls, the moment he so much as sneezes in Jin-sung's direction, his big daddy will come by and slap the shit out of all of them. I swear, the police department in K-dramas might unironically be the most useless pieces of shit in existence. Anyways, this doesn't demotivate Yee-Jae. If anything, it makes him more motivated to come up with an alternate solution, which was to pour soup over Jin-sung in the middle of the cafeteria. What a masterful gambit. I can't believe it only took him 3 weeks to figure that out. Jin-sung gets upset and demands Na do something, only for him to ignore him and even toss some disses himself.
이 새끼가 저 돌았나 씨.
넌 좀 가서 씻어야 될 것 같은데.
I don't even know what was so funny about that. Like, why is everyone laughing? Did I miss something? I also like the death stare his crush is giving him. Like, having soup put over you? Ew, ick, what a loser. Abusing children? Now that's my type of man. Anyway, Jin-sung goes to beg his big daddy to beat the shit out of Yee-Jae, which he accepts quite easily. And now fully grown men are about to kill a kid with fucking baseball bats. Why not just bring a damn sword while you're at it? I really don't understand the relationship between Big Daddy and Jin-sung. I guess we're just supposed to accept the fact that one helps the other, probably in exchange for money or some shit. Who knows, really? It's never really explained, but I guess it doesn't matter that much. We then get to see Yee-Jae happily reading the Death's Game webtoon in the middle of class, seemingly uncaring of the fate that awaits him. And when Big Daddy enters the room, he demands to see his target, only to realize that it's a literal toddler. It's actually kind of funny how the gang's clearly not against the idea of beating a kid. They just thought it wasn't worth their time. Yee-Jae takes this chance to rage bait the defeated Jin-sung even further, who attempts to swing at him, only for not to step in. I guess he no longer cares about being slapped around. And with that, Yee-Jae has overthrown the monarchy and taken control. Meanwhile, the villain has reached his lowest point, being humiliated, losing his power, and even the girl of his dreams to the goddamn super senior. Personally, I'd air out the school, American style, but that's just me. We then see Yee-Jae going out for a run, his hopes higher than ever, even if he needs to live a regular life yet again. And as he sits by, wondering where to go from here, a supposedly drunken Jin-sung stumbles into the park, looking as though he's ready to kill Yee-Jae on sight. But instead, he just gets called a moron.
병신 새끼.
저런 병신 새끼.
뭘 봐 병신아.
This sends him over the edge, a full-on crash out, and when Yee-Jae's back is turned, he grabs a brick and bashes his head repeatedly. And with that, Life 3 has come to an end. After waking up in Borderlands yet again, Yee-Jae understandably crashes out. Bro did everything in his power to avoid the most avoidable death, only to still end up here yet again. But Death's got some words of wisdom for this troubled boy.
남의 칼에 찔린 상처보다 내 손에 박힌 작은 가시가 더 아픈 거.
In basic terms, she's telling him that he only cared about bettering his own life, even if it came at the cost of somebody else's. I mean, personally, I think Jin-sang deserved it, but you get the point. Yee-Jae, however, doesn't care about the implications and continues to complain. He even questions if Kwon was really meant to die by suicide, or if that was just a lie to lure him into a false sense of security, or the Deaths just changed up the story because he was actually able to avoid the original death. Death just quite literally tosses him around, berating him for insinuating she's cheated, and outright telling him that Kwon only died in a different manner because Yee-Jae himself led him to that conclusion. And they also find something she says here pretty interesting, that if Yee-Jae ever kills himself, he'll come to face a pain even worse than hell. It's a little strange to believe that Yee-Jae would willingly end his own life again when the whole point is to try and live it out. I mean, he even gets mad when he fails, but perhaps it's just a warning if he ever comes to believe this game is rigged and just tries ending it as soon as possible. After all, aside from just being a game, Death expects Yee-Jae to treat each life as though it were not his own, because we know how that one turned out, but with the respect it deserves, because what selfish prick wouldn't? Though, this also does imply that Death is pretty understanding, because both Yee-Jae and Kwon died in a similar manner, and we can assume that Death didn't bother playing this game with Kwon and allowed him to just pass on to heaven. But Yee-Jae ruined his own life to some degree and still had probably many options to choose from before coming to a final decision. However, I can't be completely wrong and Death's got like another lobby going right now and Kwon's in the middle of his own game. Who's to really say? Yee-Jae begs to just put in an easy to survive body, but Death just smiles and increases the difficulty. He now finds himself strapped to a chair in what appears to be a torture room. He really cannot catch a break. The big bad demands he reveals the location of the money and the girl, but Yee-Jae obviously has no clue what he's waffling about. He blabbers on, hoping to stall for time and keep his eyeballs until the memory crystal finally appears. Yee-Jae has taken over the body of a notorious assassin who fell in love with who I assume to be his boss's daughter or girlfriend. It's a toss-up really in the crime world. And so he steals and hides 10 billion won and plans to escape with her, only to be caught on the way. And that brings us to this moment. His body reacts on its own, as though he's been harboring these elite skills his whole life. It's a very cool action sequence that I'm going to unfortunately fast forward through to avoid this video just becoming an audiobook. So long story short, he beats the shit out of everyone, including the one and only Joshua Newton. Clearly the writers had to nerf him. Yee-Jae practices some San Francisco driving, goes fucking crazy, finishes the episode, starts the next episode, escapes, and ultimately meets up with the love of his life at the dock's lighthouse. And with that, he's essentially won Death's game. Okay, technically the second episode didn't end there, that was part of the third, but I thought it fit much better than just ending it in the middle of the chase. In case you're curious, Joshua Newton did luckily survive, and also this life was actually an original written specifically for the adaptation. In the webtoon, Yee-Jae's fourth life was that of a magician who was in the middle of a trick gone wrong. This was actually the chapter Yee-Jae was reading earlier in the episode, but honestly I think the spy life was far better, because of Joshua Newton of course. Anyways, let's review here. This episode is just great. We actually got to see the first life in which Yee-Jae was given a fighting chance. And he didn't just live, because living would have been really easy. I mean, all he had to do was just not end his own life and get through high school. No. Yee-Jae went above and beyond because he saw himself in this boy. Or perhaps saw himself as an older brother and wanted to get revenge on Kwon's behalf. And yet, he still ultimately died because he failed to realize his own mistakes and selfishness. He failed to actually make anything better. He really only made things worse. It helps us understand understand Yee-Jae's thought process here. Sure, he did get revenge for Kwan's sake, but he also did clearly expect something in return. He expected the rest of his life to go all peachy. He thought avenging someone would win him brownie points with death, and when it clearly didn't, he got upset. Yee-Jae is clearly someone who refuses to ever take blame for anything he does, because he still believes nothing he does is wrong. It's just right in its own way, and life is the one making it seem wrong. Others are actively trying to fuck him over. However, actively blaming everyone around you instead of bettering yourself gets you nowhere. And perhaps that's what Death is trying to get him to see. She's trying to actually give him 12 chances to grow as a person. However, I will admit, one thing I didn't like about this episode, and what I kind of don't like about K-dramas as a whole, is the inclusion of high school delinquents. I've seen this same trope so many goddamn times, I've really just gotten tired of it. Like, Na is the closest to an quote-unquote original delinquent character, because he has reasons to be the way he is, even if that reason was just to avoid getting slapped around by someone even bigger. But his character is gone after this episode, so it's not like it leads to anything. I guess you can make the argument that since these characters won't be included past this episode, they aren't really important enough to be like fleshed out or anything, but I really just don't like that idea. Just because you'll be hungry later shouldn't mean the quality of the food you eat right now doesn't matter. Hopefully that analogy makes sense. I just pulled it out of my ass. I also really don't like the fake out they did with this truck almost hitting Kwan. I didn't even include it in the commentary because it added nothing to the story. It was a useless scare because the real culprit was going to attack like 3 seconds later. And I also don't get why this girl is here. Remove her and Jin Sung's crash out would have had the exact same impact. I did want to also include that they filmed all of these scenes entirely practical. No bullshit Marvel level CGI green screen everywhere here. And for one of the shots, they just sent a stuntman flying into a truck, and it deadass sounded like the crew were scared that he had died. Anyways, that's about all I can really say so far. We gotta hold on to the really juicy stuff a little bit longer. I'm going to rate this episode a solid 8 schools out of 10. Like I said, a great episode with minor hiccups that really don't mess with the overall quality. At least enough to be rated at an average or below average score. This episode, like the last, opens up with the crime scene. The only difference this time is that the camera pans down to show a doll. Let's just keep this doll in our back pockets for now. We then cut back to Yee-Jae as he wakes up yet again in Borderland, upset. I mean, come on now, that was kind of a cheap death. Either way, it doesn't really matter, because he has a masterful plan. Retrieve the stash of cash and go on to just live a peaceful life. I mean, as long as the girl doesn't get to it first. I do find it funny that for like an entire minute, he's giving this entire monologue while just staring at Death in complete silence. It's no surprise she seems a bit confused. Funnily enough, this actually does kind of rage bait Death into just pulling the trigger as soon as possible. It's also at this point where the manhwa and adaptation take separate paths in this story, as their primary lives are a bit different. For example, in the manhwa, Yee-Jae's next life is that of a criminal under house arrest due to regular and sexual assault. Meanwhile, the show depicts a far nicer crime. In the end, however, they both arrive at the same conclusion, so it's not really that big of a deal. Yee-Jae wakes up in a panic, not just because of the shot, but also because he's found himself in solitary confinement. A guard soon comes around to lead him back to his regular cell, and on the way, we can see that essentially the entire prison is out to get him. At least within his cell, his fellow inmates just fumble around because I guess they're intimidated by him. Either that or this is just their first days on Earth. The memory seems to be taking its time with this one, so Yee-Jae decides to get a feel for his current situation himself. All he learns is that he'll be released in just 4 days, and that his body's previous owner had a bit of a temper, enough to almost instigate the psychotic murderer they share a cell with. And we know he's crazy because he has disturbing drawings hung up on the walls, like this picture of a baby doll inside of a jar, alongside just a regular Barbie doll. He's also quite well read, unless those books are just there for show. And as Yee-Jae questions who this individual may be, a guard can be seen just outside the door, leading him back to the cell as well.
이진성,
Yup, Goodwill Kyung-jun comes right back, just when I thought he was finally gone. This reveal also proves that there's a bit of continuity to these lives, and by rewriting Kwan's death, Yee-Jae has essentially rewritten the future. Because although I'd like to believe the justice system would do its job, I highly doubt Jin-sung would have gone to jail if Kwan had ended himself, even if he wrote in big bold letters, Lee Jin-sung did this shit to me. It makes me wonder though, is death really just giving Yee-Jae the power to alter time and the future altogether? Anyway, back to Jin-sung. Their cellmates pull him away, afraid that Jin-sung might actually snap and kill Yee-Jae, though he refuses to stand down, let alone get intimidated by such a coward. And at that point, the memory crystal finally decides to kick in. Yee-Jae has taken over the life of Cho Tae-sang, an aspiring MMA fighter with a tough upbringing, made evident by a scene where a woman, who we can assume to be his mother, is being threatened for cash she does not have at this moment. But just as he's about to help, Cho receives a call from a lawyer, asking if he'd be willing to take the fall for a hit and run on behalf of his client, for which he'll be paid 200 million won. Cho is reluctant at first, because 200 million might not be worth having such a criminal record at that age. And plus, with the way things are going, he'll probably be out of money in like a single week. But the lawyer explains to him that he'll only receive probation since he's still an 18-year-old minor. It actually is kind of interesting how South Korean justice system considers anyone below 19 years of age a minor, but nobody else in that country does. It's also kind of funny how the police are so corrupt out here that when Cho wanted to turn himself in, the cop immediately defaulted to whipping out his wallet. Anyway, Cho turns himself in, goes to court, and ends up being served with the plot twist of a lifetime, when it's revealed that the victim of the crash ended up passing away. On top of the hit and run charge and the Grand Theft Auto charge, I don't know where that came from, Cho receives a homicide charge, leaving him to serve only 2 years in prison. 2 years for a homicide, even if accidental on top of burglary, is kind of outrageous. But who the hell is this man's client? Like Trevor Phillips? Cho was understandably pissed and ended up meeting with the lawyer to negotiate a much higher offer than what was initially given to him. He's demanding 1 billion won, or 3 Kit Kats in US currency. And if he or his client don't comply, he'll rat them out as soon as he's released. We don't yet know the outcome of Cho's threats, but considering the fact that Yee-Jae is now in his body, we can assume things didn't go so well. We also got to see a quick memory of Jin-sung reciting his AO3 fanfiction of himself. Like bro's hyping himself up when all he did was sneak attack a child. Usually in these situations, the writers would want to dance around the fact that the protagonist has knowledge that nobody else does. However, Def's game doesn't do that. Without any hesitation, Yee-Jae uses his past knowledge to rage bait the fuck out of Jin-sung, even going as far as dead naming Kwan right to his face. Anyways, after finding out the truth, everyone just beats him up. In fact, the next couple of scenes are of Jin-sung just getting relentlessly screwed over. And then we finally move on to what I think is a bit funny. Like, Cho was an aspiring MMA fighter, not an assassin or a spy. Where the hell did he get that reaction time? And how did a speeding blade ricochet off the wall and ceiling only to return to its original sender? I guess the scene also goes to show that although he's switching bodies and gaining new skills each time, the skills of Yee-Jae's previous lives won't go away. So James Bond plus Cho just equals Thanos. Anyway, Yee-Jae seems to be the only one worried for the man bleeding out. Instead, the rest have their eyes fixated on killing him. We learned that the lawyer and client were the ones to organize the hit, seeing as how Cho was being quite uncooperative. And instead of attacking from a distance like Chud number 1, the group decides to jump Yee-Jae in one-on-one hand-to-hand combat. Are you surprised that he mopped the floor with everyone? I also like how when everything is said and done, Yee-Jae says this.
야, 힘은 끝내준다. 아니 정권이 있지만 젊고 싸움도 잘하고.
Like he should know better than anyone else that Cho was framed. Come on now. Oh, and the little dude who I don't think they actually named ran away before the fight and came back in with a Gmod crowbar right as it ended. For all intent and purposes, I'm going to be naming little bro Ezekiel. Do not ask why. The two move on to the courtyard where they take a seat and have a little heart to heart. I would think he'd want to stay inside, seeing as how he's being targeted by like everyone. Regardless, Ezekiel explains how he's unsure of what he's supposed to do after being released. I mean, it's pretty hard for criminals to be accepted back into society, especially especially depending on the severity of their crime. He doesn't actually state his crime, but we can assume it's something bad. The point of this conversation, however, is the feeling of regret. Yee-Jae thinks back to the moment he took his own life and wonders if he really does regret the decision. And he does, but only because he was made to suffer even after everything was meant to be over. Perhaps living would have been a lot easier than having go through death's little game. He also tells Ezekiel that, unlike him, perhaps he still has a second chance at life. But bro was deadass zoned out the entire time. Yee-Jae then goes back to torturing Jin-sang, though that's not really important. I do find it funny though how Jin-sang mentions that they're all in juvie or juvenile detention, basically prison for kids. So tell me, why the fuck do all of these guys look like they're over 40? Bro's got a mortgage to pay and he's out here beefing with children. Anyway, the day of his release finally arrives. Yee-Jae leaves Jin-sang with one more traumatic memory and years worth of psychosis before setting out to find the One Piece, aka the stash of cash. However, his plans are slightly hindered once he finds the lawyer, alongside a mysterious tinted car watching them from behind. Seeing as how the assassination attempts failed, the lawyer offers up all the money Cho had asked for. However, Yee-Jae refuses the offer simply because he doesn't want to accept quote-unquote dirty money, even though he's about to go collect money stolen from gang members, but I digress. He's also not Cho and wants to set aside anything related to him and continue living this new and hopefully safe life. Though, judging by the lawyer's ominous glare, we can assume this wasn't the right set of dialogue. Yee-Jae returns to the lighthouse where it all happened. Thankfully, the prison was within walking distance. He sets sail to the hiding spot and, to his relief, finds the cash in perfect shape, alongside a ring that's worth millions. And now he has undeniably won Death's game and can start the rest of his soon-to-be luxurious life. He decides to take a rest, looking to brainstorm how to safely navigate this situation once he's fully re-energized. But soon after he falls asleep, he wakes up to the gentle touch and warm smile of his mother. It might have been just a dream, but he does receive a call from Cho's mother. We then see a flashback to that fateful moment, where Yee-Jae is seen painfully declining his mother's call before walking off the ledge. Didn't happen, but I digress. And so, he decides to actually answer it this time, and the lady on the other end immediately apologizes for ruining his life, taking all the blame upon herself for her son landing in prison, for giving him a troubled life. She then asks if he's on the way home, because she so desperately wants to see her boy again. Yee-Jae wants to decline, seeing as how this isn't actually his mother and he's finally gotten a chance to start anew, but he can't help but think of his own mother, of not getting to see her any longer, not getting to be with her, or making her proud of every step he took. He knows more than anyone how it feels to disappoint your parents, and even more how that pain of never getting to see each other feels. And so, he agrees to meet up with her, not just for his sake, but for Cho and his mother. One thing I'd like to add is how, in both scenes where Yee-Jae gets a call from his mother, he wasn't given the option to decline. I know that's just how iPhones work, but I honestly believe it's a means of life attempting to reel him back and away from that fate. Like, they're not really giving him a choice, just answer the damn call. But in the first scenario, he refuses and it leads to his fate. It's also really depressing to think Cho never got to see his mother again, especially because the only reason his life was even put in danger was because he wanted to help her. We obviously don't know when or how he died, but we know Yee-Jae was put in his body with a couple of days to spare, and judging from that scene in the workshop, we can take a good guess where he died. Anyway, Yee-Jae stores a majority of the cash in a locker as he's looking to hand over the rest to Cho's mother as an apology. He is going to be taking over her son's life after all, so chances are tonight will be the last time she gets to see him. He sets a password and makes a mental note to return soon, seeing as how the locker is cleared in only 4 days. He then heads through Cho's hometown and through a dark alleyway, all the while someone trails him. He gets distracted by another call, most likely his mother, asking him where he is, only for this moment to unfortunately distract him, long enough to deliver a lethal message. He's stabbed multiple times and attempts to resist only to fall over and slowly bleed out. His killer? The father of the victim of the hit and run. He wrongfully assumed Cho was the cause and came to get his revenge. He was also at the hearing where we can see him get rightfully angry at such a lenient sentence, and he was the one staring at him from tinted windows. But just as he's about to put an end to it all, Ezekiel slides in here and stops him. He frantically asks if Yee-Jae is okay, to which he claims that he should be able to live.
다행이다. 아 놀랐잖아요. 다른 새끼한테 죽는 줄 알고. 뭐?
And here it is revealed that Ezekiel was also hired to kill him. In fact, that's why he brought the crowbar earlier, to help the others take on Yee-Jae, but he returned at the worst time. He also starts reciting a monologue straight out of Hamlet, which can just be summarized as a simple, "Damn, I wish I didn't go to prison." In one last ditch effort to stay alive, Yee-Jae offers to pay Ezekiel instead, but he doesn't believe him and simply finishes the job. As Yee-Jae's life slowly flees away, he sees another call from his mother. He desperately reaches for it, wanting nothing more than to answer, but he lacks the strength. And with that, life number 5 has come to an end. He wakes up at the Borderlands yet again, this time not angry, not crashing out, not even yelling at Death for how unfair these games are. Instead, he's crying. He just wants to see his mother one last time. He then takes a moment to compose himself and glares at Death, who seems almost surprised by his reaction. Yee-Jae then takes a seat and explains that he's learned his biggest mistake, not taking into consideration the victim whose family would understandably want revenge. Death laughs at the statement, perhaps because that was far from his true mistake, or because Yee-Jae would have easily seen through it if he hadn't been so selfish. And since he wants to talk about equivalent exchange so much, she asks him a simple question. Who would your mother want to kill? Of course, Yee-Jae has no answer, because he hadn't been killed by anyone, so he doesn't see a need to quote-unquote exchange lives. Death just calls him an idiot. In this scene, we're also shown that Death can actually read Yee-Jae's thoughts while he's in her office, maybe even perhaps when he's in the real world. She's just been choosing to ignore him up until this point.
빨리 쏘라고. 제발.
그래? 그렇게 원한다면요.
Death leaves him with the brightest and most ominous smile she could muster as Yee-Jae moves on to his next life. As he curiously scans what looks to be the inside of a cafe, he thinks hard about how he'll get back at Death for making a fool of him, and how to retrieve his money. However, he can't move, nor can he speak, and once he sees his reflection, he understands why.
뭐야? 낙이야? 이 개 같은 년.
Now, I'll just be honest, this is by far the weakest episode. The highlights here are the lives. I mean, James Bond was an incredible watch, thanks to Joshua Newton, of course. Cho is just an incredible guy, and the baby is a great cliffhanger. Even more importantly, we get to see Yee-Jae begin to show signs of regret for his previous actions. As he was standing there contemplating his end, he was so lost and distracted by how unfair his life had been treating him that he never once stopped to think how it'd feel once he was gone. He didn't stop to consider that death was permanent, and whatever he's leaving behind as Choi Yee-Jae will forever be unobtainable. It's the first signs of development in his personality, but his intense focus on this game is hindering its ability to grow further. It's even more emotional to see just how much not getting to see his mother again hurts him, and those feelings are amplified further when we take into consideration that both Cho and Kwon were also taken very soon. Two people who cared deeply about their mother, and whose mother cared deeply about them, lost their lives before they were even given the chance to say goodbye. Meanwhile, Yee-Jae had that chance, but he never took it because of his mental state in that moment. Perhaps that's what Death is trying to get him to see, that nobody hand selected his life to ruin. Everyone is going through some shit, and it was unfair to take his own life so soon when people around him still cared. Death is essentially giving Yee-Jae the answers on a silver platter, but he's far too stubborn and selfish to see any of it. Hell, even after he died, and while he was still alive, all he thought about was getting to see his mom, and why he didn't get to continue his life. He doesn't even stop to think how his real mom must be feeling, which Death subtly throws at him by asking that one question earlier. Who would your mother want to kill? Anyways, while all of that was pretty cool, what I didn't like about this episode was basically everything else. Although it was funny to see Jin-sung rage baited into oblivion, I feel like it was dragged on for far too long. The action sequences here were also pretty dope, but ultimately served as just filler to pad the runtime. By the way, I'm not saying I hate action and want to see people talking 24/7. I'm just saying that when compared to future sequences, the ones in this episode don't really seem to advance the plot or explain anything significant. They're just there to jingle keys in front of the viewers so they'll put down TikTok or Reels and just pay attention. I also don't like how the father of the victim just kind of appeared out of nowhere. Like, I wish they foreshadowing him in at least one scene, like the court hearing, even if subtly. Because like, if your quote-unquote big reveal relies on withholding what is clearly crucial information until afterwards, it's going to feel a bit underwhelming. The viewers don't get that feeling of thinking, I knew it, or I saw that coming. Instead, they're just left thinking, oh, okay. I guess we were meant to feel like Yee-Jae, essentially ignoring what was clearly a key factor in Cho's life because it didn't seem very important to us. But I just don't know. From a writing standpoint, it just kind of feels a bit cheap. Foreshadowing exists for a reason. This also does include the scene where Yee-Jae declines the call from his mother. A scene that could have been included in the first episode, but wasn't, and instead retconned to fit the story's need, as if the viewer's memory is that short. This is why Ezekiel's plot twist at least had a little bit more impact. There were at least 2 scenes of foreshadowing his ulterior motives, that being the woodshop class and the heart-to-heart with Yee-Jae, to some degree of course. I kinda wish there were more, but it was at least enough to let him shine in that moment. Though, to be honest, the way he acts turns me off. Like, I hate how in almost every Korean drama, and also just a lot of media in general, the character they try passing off as an antagonist, psycho, always performs as though they're auditioning for the Joker. Like, do they all have to act in this over-the-top way? The most psychotic man I've seen in real life quite literally is incapable of displaying the slightest bit of emotion in their faces or voice. Anyways, nitpick. The point I'm trying to make is that this episode gets a solid 7 skulls out of 10. Not bad, just a bit lackluster when compared to the previous 2. To those of you wondering how this compares to the manhwa or webtoon, I will say that Cho's life did happen almost 1-to-1, but his personality is a lot more nasty in the manhwa, essentially Burlington Kyungjun. And it also happens after 2 previous lives, one of which literally being a famous Twitch streamer. That's how he gets the money which he stashes for future use. And I shit you not, he dies there because he was streaming way too hard. Anyways, let's just move on to the next episode. The Reason Why You're Afraid of Death. That title goes kinda hard. This episode opens the same as before, which I will admit is a little annoying. We also get another prolonged shot of the baby doll, and I guess it's supposed to represent the life Yee-Jae is currently in? We then cut back to where we left off. Yee-Jae bawling his eyes out in the middle of a Starbucks while his new mother casually exits the bathroom. She doesn't seem to care that her child is crying. Instead, she seems more embarrassed that everyone is staring. This gives us a good idea of what kind of mother she truly is. Also, this scene right after. She even yeets the baby onto the couch like some kind of ragdoll. The father seems nice at first, but when Yee-Jae refuses to eat already expired baby food, he just starts trauma dumping. Although this life seems unfortunate, there is a bit of a silver lining. The police have arrived due to a report of child abuse. They go to investigate the child's body, but are stopped as the father presents his business card. He also works in child welfare. Dear God, help those children. And apparently that's enough for CPS to just go, oh, alright, cool, you're all good then. As soon as the workers leave, the mother screams at her baby, throws him on the floor, and suffocates him with a pillow. And with that, Life 6 has come to an end. Yee-Jae wakes up yet again, annoyed. He demands to know why there wasn't a memory orb, or an answer as to how he was even supposed to survive such an impossible life. It's simple, he really just wasn't. Because although it was kind of cheating in some regards, the point of this life was to teach him a lesson, that nothing is ever guaranteed in life, and that does include parents, something Yee-Jae has taken for granted. Death is trying to get Yee-Jae to see that to have the chance at a fruitful life was a miracle in its own right. Yee-Jae only ever cares about himself, about winning this game of an incredible life. He never stops to think about what the point of it all is. This segment also hammers home the idea of how easy it is for us to complain about things we have or the things that happen to us, while some people would literally kill to have that same problem. Hell, I've caught myself complaining about only getting 120 frames instead of 180 on Rivals. Like first world problems, am I right? I joked around this segment because I didn't really want to kill the mood or vibe, but the truth of the matter is that this situation is no joke. It happens far too often, and if a protector fails to do their job, the child will go on to either grow up an equally terrible person, or they'll just simply never get to. Regardless, Yee-Jae refuses to see the truth. He just wants to get on with the game. And Death complies, because at this point, it seems that no matter how hard he may struggle, Yee-Jae essentially has 0 chances at winning. However, for whatever reason, she decides to add a new rule to the mix. If he ever attempts to kill anyone in any of his new lives, Death herself will intervene. And after another shot, Yee-Jae wakes up in the middle of a busy street, with his first instinct being to check the time. 15 minutes until the locker is nice clean. Def was pretty nice to have thrown him into a body that was literally right in front of the station. Yee-Jae sprints to the locker, arriving just before the worker grabs a hold of his stash. And as he breathes a sigh of relief, he notices something quite odd. The billboard behind him seems to boast an image of himself, or well, his new body. And that's when the memory crystal appears. Yee-Jae has taken over the life of Jang Gyun-ju. I am so sorry guys, I cannot pronounce these names. A 24-year-old model who lived the greatest life imaginable thanks to simply being attractive. That was literally the extent of his memory, by the way. I'm not even joking. He was just born good looking and got rich thanks to it, and somehow it's already better than lookism. On a good note, Yee-Jae finds a newspaper detailing the arrest of the parents from before, and beside this is also a notice for a serial killer currently at large, with arson and traffic accidents listed as the main crime. Perhaps a little callback to our mystery client, and it seems people put two and two together that Cho was most likely not the actual perpetrator. Yee-Jae then receives a call from someone who seems to be his friend, or perhaps manager, asking if he's coming to the club. There are some pretty powerful people out here, and some pretty girls, which was actually all Yee-Jae needed to hear to go in. Anyways, he gets drunk after like 3 shots, and still has to attempt to woo the host of this party. And the host is none other than current Taekang CEO, Park Tae-yu. In case you forgot about him, he was the one who interviewed Yee-Jae all the way in the beginning. And he is also the brother to the guy who died in a plane crash. It seems like he's taken over the company after his brother's not so unfortunate passing. In some ways, you can also blame him for starting Yee-Jae's depressive spiral, though Yee-Jae seems to be a little too drunk to really care. And what follows is a quick party montage that ends with him lying on his bed and receiving frantic calls from his new brother. He reminds Yee-Jae that he'll be out of town for the next week, and that he supposedly agreed to run his cafe in the meantime. Though I guess it doesn't really matter because Yee-Jae plans on just running away as soon as his brother leaves with all of his newfound wealth. Or at least he would have if a certain someone didn't suddenly appear.
This is Diamond Sword to Major Steve. You're gonna find diamonds.
The girl that enters the cafe is none other than Lee Ji-soo, Yee-Jae's ex-girlfriend. We even see scenes of her proudly stating that she'll never love another man besides him. We also see that the two met when Lee accidentally dropped part of her manuscript. It's that easy to find love, huh? You know those memes of how like K-dramas drag out random emotional scenes to like an hour long by adding a whole bunch of nothing in slow motion? Meanwhile, a sad song plays in the background? Yeah, that's not a meme, that's literally what's happening here. Anyways, once that's done, I've grown a full beard while Lee orders a citron tea and takes a seat, not even so much as glancing towards Yee-Jae or Jun-Yu. And even when she does catch his eye, she seems almost annoyed. Yee-Jae learns that she always comes by around this time and stays until closing, because writing has never felt better than anywhere but a cafe. Guys, I tried writing this script in a cafe once and felt like such a loser that I turned my brightness all the way down and gave up after 2 sentences. Yee-Jae learns that Lee actually has been a bit successful in her writing career, even going as far as winning an award. And during an interview, she quite literally glazes the fuck out of him. She was even excited to tell him about her award, only for him to crash both their worlds that same night. Lee was even willing to give Yee-Jae her entire winnings to pay his bills because she cared about him. It's also revealed that Yee-Jae had bought her a fountain pen, a symbol of their love and just how much he believes in her. You'd think that after everything we've seen of him so far, Yee-Jae would feel a sense of envy. Like, why is she doing so good when he was getting dogpiled on? Why does she seem to be living such a calm life while he's out here trying to fight to stay alive? But no, instead, Yee-Jae feels a sense of guilt and perhaps remorse. Hopefully Def is happy to see he's changing, even if it took one of the most powerful shoves of all time. Oh, and the chauffeur is actually revealed to be Lee's older brother. I find it really weird how this is the first time Yee-Jae's ever seen him, unless their entire relationship began and ended after only like a week, which would kind of be funny. Yee-Jae attempts to restart a connection the following day, and he does so by ignoring his actual job and her boundaries and begins explaining the idea he had for a story. This idea is about a game that devs make someone play, almost like a devs game. They talk for a bit, Yee-Jae begins to trauma dump, and Lee does one of the funniest things I've ever seen in the K-drama.
이 소설 주인공 이름은 뭐예요?
이제 생각해 봐야 돼요.
Yee-Jae says he hasn't figured out the name of his story's protagonist, but it sounds as though he says his own name, and this seems to activate the sleeper agent hiding within Lee. And after he asks her to sign his book, she reveals that she did actually receive the fountain pen he had bought for her. His mother had found it when gathering his belongings, and handed it to her later on. Days pass as the two continue their newfound relationship, and on one rainy night, he hurries to hand her an umbrella and tells her just how much he appreciates the time he spends with her. He then returns to the cafe, and while cleaning up a mess somebody made, he hears an ambulance in the background. But it isn't until someone walks by talking about an accident involving a regular customer that Yee-Jae believes the worst had happened. He sprints out of the cafe and to the scene of the crime, only to find splatters of blood and a broken umbrella. He struggles to get past the cops, desperate to know if Lee survived. But she did, because it was a completely different person who had gotten hit. Def really likes to fuck with Yee-Jae. Anyway, the two reunite once again, leaving the cafe completely unmanned and unsecure. And as Lee wraps Yee-Jae's bloody hand, she asks if he's alright, because that was one hell of a crash out. He lies and says he is. He just believed he knew the victim. And before they part, he tells her she'll be awaiting her return tomorrow. However, Lee won't be. Simply put, she finds herself attracted to the man in front of her, but she can never let go of the man she truly loves. Yee-Jae follows her to his own memorial at a funeral home, and watches as she cries at the memory of him, as she apologizes, wishing she had done something, anything, to have changed his mind. It's here too where Yee-Jae finally comes face to face with his real mother, who wonders what a stranger is doing at her son's memorial. He sees her also apologize to her son before hurrying into the bathroom to let out all of her emotions. Even someone as selfish as Yee-Jae can't stand to bear the pain of seeing the people you care about most in such a state, especially not when he knows he is to blame. He's finally beginning to realize what his death has caused. Until now, he's deluded himself into thinking that his death was just that, a death. One life gone from the world that nobody would care about, let alone shed a tear. Like he believed that nobody benefited from his existence and refused to believe anyone who told him otherwise. That's the unfortunate reality of those who end up in Yee-Jae's same situation. They don't think about what can be or what truly is, or even those around them. They've already come to a single conclusion and they won't be giving themselves enough time to see otherwise. What feels even worse is the fact that he can't really apologize, at least not directly, both because he doesn't know if he can stand the guilt and because it'd be difficult to do so when he has a different face. Instead, he decides to write his mother a letter, pretending to be an acquaintance, and delivers it to her apartment alongside the bag of cash. After the next date's little coffee date, Yee-Jae walks Lee home as he drops a true banger of a line. The reason we're afraid of death is because there will be no tomorrow. Everything we work for, everything we love, will just slip from our grasps, and it can happen at quite literally any moment. Lee circles back to his story and asks if there is a happy ending. Yee-Jae obviously isn't sure yet. In fact, he doesn't really know if a happy ending is even possible, but Lee hopes it is. She hopes the protagonist can live happily ever after, because perhaps he didn't deserve everything that's happened to him. Upon hearing this, Yee-Jae can no longer control himself. He's desperate to reveal the truth, because this may in fact be his last couple of minutes alive. He apologizes for being an idiot, for not realizing sooner that there were still people who cared about him, for ending it all so soon, for not fighting harder through the obstacles, for making constant mistakes, apologizing for everything he's done to her, before revealing his true identity. Lee couldn't believe it. After all, the idea that someone she knew was reincarnated into a different body seemed almost like a fairy tale, and yet he sounds sincere, genuine, almost as if he really was Choi Yee-Jae. A man steps out of the car, unfazed by the sudden tragedy he had just caused, and this man is none other than Park Tae-yu, with his lawyer in the passenger seat. He was the one who forced Cho into jail. He was the one who orchestrated the death of his own brother. That came out of nowhere. And he is now the one to kill Lee Ji-soo. Park laughs at her corpse before turning over to Yee-Jae and finishing the job. And with that, Life 7 comes to an end. Yee-Jae wakes up in Borderland yet again, but this time with more despair and anger than he's ever felt before. Def, however, couldn't care less. Furious by her demeanor, Yee-Jae snatches the gun from her desk, aims it at her head, and pulls the trigger. And that's the end of episode 4. Now, there are 3 things I want to touch on. The first being that we now know what the beginning of the last couple of episodes were foreshadowing, the death of Lee Ji-soo. I mean, we already assumed as much thanks to the not so subtle clues. Honestly, if they hadn't shown off the photo of Yee-Jae, that moment would have probably been just as impactful. Perhaps even more because it would have been less expected. But it was still good, don't get me wrong. However, I still don't really understand the baby doll. It might really have been to just hint at the life Yee-Jae began with in this episode, which I really don't think was necessary. Or perhaps it's to represent innocence, which Lee kind of is, only for that innocence to be stained with blood due to an unrelenting force. The second thing I want to mention is something I realized while rewatching this episode. This entire story focuses on a single character's journey. Sun, the actor who plays Yee-Jae, essentially sets the bar with how this character is meant to be portrayed, and every actor after that must basically follow in his footsteps. After all, regardless of the face we see, all of these people are Choi Yee-Jae. That's how they're meant to be portrayed, and one small mistake in the performance can easily break our immersion. And while everyone does a great job, this man right here, Lee Do-hyun, literally blows it out of the water. Not to glaze him too much, but this man decided to arrive on set that day and mog everyone. Hell, Jisoo probably wasn't even crying because she remembered Yee-Jae or was in the script, but instead because he was giving the performance of a lifetime, though I'm sure Joshua Newton would have been able to do just as good. Lastly, I just want to mention how this is one of the most important episodes of this show. Not only did this progress the story further than any other, not only were the performances great all around, but this episode gives you, the viewer, a proper insight into the intricacies of death. For the person that goes along with it, it seems quite simple. For example, just throw yourself off a bridge and it'll be over in less than a minute. But the aftermath of such an act is something people never consider. The pain it leaves behind. For some, that pain may just be a number on a statistic sheet. It's unfortunate but true. But for others, it's the feelings and emotions that people who knew and or cared about you go through. Perhaps blaming themselves for not doing something to help you. Perhaps just attempting to put themselves into your shoes only to realize the despair you may have felt. Or perhaps it's just a thought that remains with them throughout their everyday lives. A thought that makes them value life more because once it ends, that's it. Or perhaps a thought that makes them value life less because of how dispensable it seems. And we also must not forget that we must cherish our lives deeply and be grateful to those that have hopefully helped us get this far. Because not everyone has the luck to even make it past their first couple of years in this world. And life can end at quite literally any moment. And for those reasons, I won't be rating this episode because its importance far surpasses a simple number. Though if I did have a number, it'd be a 10 out of 10.
자, 드디어 목표치 달성으로 잠시 후 공약을 이행하겠습니다. 살인마 유기락을 사냥하는 모습을 보여드리죠.
This episode begins with a live stream where we see 2 guys happily announcing that they'll be beating the shit out of a heinous criminal. Mr. Beast has really gone too far this time. However, before they're able to, a strange figure suddenly appears from within the darkness. He beats the shit out of them instead and saves the criminal. Though, as he drives home, he reveals that he is a painter and he was only in that building to gather materials for his new piece. And that material is him. Because this man does not simply create art with mere paint. He creates masterpieces with the blood of his victims. Now, in case you're curious, this all does happen in the manhwa, though the circumstances and outcomes are far different. In fact, the criminal who was captured was meant to be Yee-Jae, though it was entirely rewritten. We then cut back to where we left off. Yee-Jae has shot Death and now attempts to shoot himself. However, he's out of bullets. And Death is obviously still alive. I don't know why he thought that would actually work. It's like trying to send God to heaven. Knowing what angered him the most, Death explains that Jisoo was always meant to die in that exact spot by that same exact man. The only difference this time was that she actually got to know who she'd die with. There was literally nothing he could have done to change that fate. However, Yee-Jae refuses to accept this fact and vows to kill Park Tae-yu once in his new life. But Death reminds him of the rule. If he attempts to kill anyone, she herself will intervene. She then even retrieves the exact same bullet he fired scared and pop that shit right back into his skull, just to remind him who is really in charge here. Suddenly, Yee-Jae wakes up covered in blood, as he has taken over the life of the sadistic painter we just saw. Bro aura farmed in the opening just to die like 5 seconds later. The crystal emerges from within a bucket of blood and speeds into Yee-Jae's head. This here is Jung Gyu-chol, I really hope I pronounced that right, a 34-year-old maniac who also happens to be a talented artist. But the art world simply wasn't ready for his beauty, because art is just a bunch of bullshit anyways. However, one day, he stumbled upon a man who fell from a nearby building. It's not Yee-Jae, guys, don't worry. Whether or not this man fell on purpose doesn't really matter to us, because Jung was more fascinated by the blood pouring out of his head, which he would use for his first piece. And after selling it to some rich asshole in America, not a joke by the way, his successful career of torturing random people and painting their despair came to be. Yee-Jae cannot help but vomit upon learning this information, coupled with the countless horrific memories he most likely had to witness. I mean, who wouldn't? Like, sweet baby Jesus, man, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? However, he does find a bit of comfort in realizing that he can use this demon to take down another. It's strange how death essentially gave him the greatest opportunity to kill Park here, but perhaps she's attempting to shove him in the wrong direction on purpose, so that when he inevitably breaks the rules, she can step in and send him straight to hell. Speaking of Park, we get to see a quick scene of him duck hunting with a pal, or lackey, honestly who really knows. Though when this dude's back is turned, Park fantasizes about killing him, just in case you needed any more proof this guy is insane. We then cut back to Yee-Jae, who's made his way to the site of the crash, reliving both his and Lee's death like Dominic Toretto. And if his recreation is what we're meant to take as canon, that means their deaths weren't even an accident. Park literally just drifts to make sure he got a high score here. We also see that the lawyer from earlier becomes the scapegoat for this catastrophe, with his payment being in the form of owning an entire company once he's released. He also drops a micro SD card filled with evidence, while Park tosses away Lee's fountain pen. Yee-Jae goes on to retrieve both items and heads over to Tai King headquarters, looking to get his revenge as soon as possible. Unfortunately for him, Park isn't in his office right now. Instead, he's right behind them. Like, what the fuck, bro? It's like watching an episode of Dora. Can you help me find Park? Yeah, he's right fucking behind you. We switch back over to Park, who attends a company-organized TED Talk on the subject of psychopathic American CEOs. Yes, specifically America, because everyone knows how batshit insane rich people are in this country.
This, according to Oxfam, of the world's 85 richest people, is equal to the 3.5 billion poorest people.
It's fantastic. And this is a great thing because I get to buy another mansion.
What's even funnier is how the study shows that the more psychotic a CEO is, the more successful they'll become, quote unquote, because they push forward to their desires. No, because they literally just kill anyone that tries to rival them. The presenter then focuses on their up and coming CEO to gauge his level of success. We don't need to see the results of this test because we already know he's insane, but I've decided to let you guys take the test as well. Question 1. How many smiling faces can you see here? If you said literally anything other than 3, you're cooked, bro, potato chip. Question 2. Which of these photos is different from the rest? If you said anything besides the number 3, again, just pack your bags, bro. And that's it. The entire test was literally like 2 questions long. By the way, it takes Park like 50 light years to answer the first question, which even the presenter finds weird, but nobody really seems to care in the end. Like, you don't question the people in power. They are always good people after all. Anyway, the next scene is of Yee-Jae glaring at a video of a Park, thinking about just how much he'll make him suffer. However, as he does so, he suddenly gets a nosebleed and passes out on the pavement. That's when we learn that Jung has a brain tumor, one that has already gone far beyond the point of saving.
얼마나 살 수 있죠?
길어야 한 달입니다.
충분하네요.
As Yee-Jae leaves the hospital, he gets a call from someone we can assume to be his agent, who tells him a buyer is looking to purchase one of his paintings. And this buyer is none other than Park Tae-yu. Quite the happy coincidence. And so he hurries to the gallery and stumbles into a quite satisfied sadist, gazing upon such a captivating piece of art. One made with the blood of not 1, not 2, but 5 victims in total. It does look kind of cool under this lighting though. Yee-Jae takes his chance to slightly rage bait him, essentially the foreplay to his murder. And as soon as the room clears out, Yee-Jae prepares himself for revenge, only to get blue-balled by Park's manager, or agent, or secretary, or whatever the fuck, who really cares. Seeing his chance slip away, Yee-Jae throws one last curveball to hopefully save the game. He agrees to sell this masterpiece, but only if he can personally deliver it to Park's home, and afterwards they can return to his studio, where he'll paint another incredible piece right in front of him. The next couple of scenes are of Park's past, which can be summarized as he's just been insane since childhood, which is why he got passed up for the CEO position, and also why he later killed his brother. We then see him at church, where his father is giving a speech mourning the loss of the one son he actually loved. This angers Park. When will his father shut up about his brother and just bow down to him? And so, to clear his mind, he goes for a drive far beyond the speed limit, causing 2 off-duty cops to spot and chase after him, even though one clearly wants to just enjoy his glizzy. In the end, Park is cornered. Find it really funny how the officer conducts his stop here.
선생님, 과속을 심하게 하셨네요. 신분증 먼저 주시고 보시죠.
Like, damn, bro, give him a second. By the way, these two are also detectives, which surprised me because I didn't know detectives were allowed to have sirens. And what a soy detective this dude is. He's just eating a corn dog while his partner does all the work. Detective Chad here gives Park a ticket, because obviously, and was about to send him on his way until he realized he was very clearly tweaking. He immediately throws himself into a dangerous confrontation, which Detective Soy recognizes almost immediately. He steps out and attempts to save him, because he knows full well it's much better to not mess with someone of his status. Someone who, with just a single phone call, can get himself out of this situation scot-free.
예.
야, 너 옷 벗고 싶어? 바쁜 분이니까 빨리 사과 보내드려.
네, 알겠습니다. 죄송합니다. 그냥 가시죠.
싫은데.
Detective Soy clearly wants to help his partner, but wusses out as soon as Park threatens to get him fired. He gets to keep slapping Detective Chad over and over and over again, before throwing some bills at him and moving over to caress the bootlicker. And now we can return our focus to Yee-Jae, who seems to be approaching Park's home. He stops his car just before hitting him, because although he's higher than a kite, that reaction time is still top notch. Park is confused by his presence. I mean, where the hell even is the painting? But Yee-Jae doesn't care enough to answer. Instead, he disrespects him by casually cleaning his shoes on his car. For that, Park smacks the shit out of him too, but Yee-Jae doesn't back down. He never gives up. They throw hands for a moment, and Yee-Jae clearly has the upper hand here. At least until Park pulls out a fucking shotgun, which I guess he just had in the passenger seat, and which Detective Chad didn't see?
Oh, pimp down, pimp in disgrace.
But Yee-Jae is fine thanks to a bulletproof vest and immediately turns the tables. Park is down. Yee-Jae sprints to the car like Officer Earl and attempts to run him over. Park loses his weapon in his desperate attempts to dodge. In the end, Yee-Jae retrieves the weapon and knocks Park unconscious before taking him back to his studio, describing what he's about to do to him and throwing him onto the table. He then carefully and patiently prepares himself for torture. Goddamn cancer, you did it again. And the next time Yee-Jae wakes up, he's strapped to the table instead. Park has taken control of the situation. Before he can kill Yee-Jae, however, he needs to set the mood by recounting his many killings, including the accidental hit from the first episode, which traumatized the original Yee-Jae. He mentions how good it felt to be looked as though he were a god by a man on his deathbed, pleading to save his life. But no matter how many people he killed after that, he could never regain that same sensation, which is why he wants Yee-Jae to beg for mercy, beg for his life. That's about the extent of his defiance, and once Park gets started with his long and strenuous torture, Life 8 soon comes to an end. Yee-Jae wakes up in the Borderlands yet again, making sure his body is still intact. Meanwhile, Death casually leans against her desk, smiling, reminding that he had just experienced the most painful death so far, and that things will still get worse. She expects Yee-Jae to cry, to crash out, throw a tantrum, shout, literally anything to express his anger or fear of his situation, but he doesn't. Instead, he laughs. Because unbeknownst to both Def and Park, security cameras were set up in the studio, and they had just recorded all the proof he needed. And that's the end of episode 5. To be honest, this was my second least favorite episode. Not hating on anyone in particular, but I'm pretty tired of just seeing the exact same portrayal of an antagonist in K-dramas. It's like every Korean actor is hardwired to act the exact same way once they learn their character. And after the first, it just feels ridiculously generic and a bit cringy. It's not like Park Tae-yoo is a bad character per se. There are some bits of his past and personality that can make for a decent story, but I feel like the writers and actors didn't really play to those strengths. Perhaps because they were scared nobody would get it or nobody would like it because it's too different, and instead just let him off the leash. And I don't really like the explanation of him just being born crazy. Like, bro casually admits to popping pills as a child. It's just really lazy writing because it proves they didn't want to spend the time to brainstorm a proper backstory. Also really didn't like the abundance of scenes we got with him because almost every single one of them made the exact same point, that this man is just crazy. Only about 2 of those scenes were really necessary, but I won't say which for the sake of spoilers. Also find it weird how the show introduces an antagonist like Park Tae-yoo, even though he plays kind of a minor role in the overall story. Like, if we removed him entirely, we still get a pretty good short story about the value of life, but I guess that would also be deleting more than half of the original source material. Fun fact, Park Tae-yoo is actually an original character for the adaptation. I appreciate when an adaptation changes up the source material where they can actually find an improvement. Sometimes authors just add a bit too much or don't add enough to their original stories. Like, I didn't need to see 3 books worth of Hermione Granger trying to free slaves and everyone laughing at her for it. That's gonna be a couple of really weird scenes now. Like, if an adaptation was 1-to-1 with the source material, then there's really no reason for it besides simply make money. That's not to say they should always deviate, absolutely not. We do not need dog shit disguised as beloved franchises. I'm just trying to say that change isn't bad, so long as it works in tangent with the story and doesn't mess up the overall plot or insinuates the wrong kind of message. Just so nobody gets confused, what I'm trying to say is I like Park Tae-yoo's inclusion because it adds an actual interesting antagonist compared to the manhwa. However, I still feel like an antagonist isn't that necessary within this type of narrative. Either way, this episode is still pretty fun overall, and many things included here will have what I believe is a satisfying conclusion. For that reason, I'll rate this episode a solid 6 skulls out of 10. Let's move on to the 6th episode, which is simply called Memory. I find it funny how only 3 out of 8 episodes have short titles, meanwhile the rest are like full-on sentences. We opened this episode right where we left off, with Yee-Jae ecstatic to keep the game running. Although Def is annoyed by his actually happy demeanor for once, if you can call it that, she ultimately obliges. Yee-Jae finds himself in the midst of a chase, which quickly ends at one of the worst barriers I've ever seen. The man angrily calls Yee-Jae a pig, which immediately tells him what type of body he's taken over.
짭새? 그럼 나 경찰이야?
Although Yee-Jae seems pleased by the fact that he's Detective Choi, he unfortunately does not have the skills to fight the perpetrator until the memory kicks in. I guess James Bond has already left his body, and so he runs away, leading him to get saved by Detective Chad, who I guess was lagging behind by about 30 miles. After apprehending the criminal, Chad gives Yee-Jae a stern scolding for being a coward, and that's when the memory crystal finally decides to arrive. Yee-Jae has taken over the life of An Ji-hyung, a 42-year-old detective who got his start after learning of his father's heroic passing, even if his mother hated the idea. She's already lost her husband to the force, she couldn't bear to lose her son as well. But An makes a promise that no matter what, he'll look after himself above all else, even if it means having to run away from the face of danger. A cop afraid of violence is like a pilot afraid of heights. And after his mother's passing, all An had left was the disdain of his colleagues. Who really knows if he died on duty, died by his own means, or no longer cared about what happened to him? After the memory concludes, a fight breaks out just down the street between some random dude and Ezekiel. That's right, he's still strolling around society after murdering a man in cold blood. In fact, the guy he's tossing around is the one who owes him money for killing Cho. Yee-Jae confronts Ezekiel, rage baiting him until he admits to murder in front of everyone. Of course, they're just recording this shit instead of calling the cops, thank god they were right there. Frustrated, Ezekiel attacks, only to get two-pieced, low-diffed, boxed like a fish by Yee-Jae in less than 4 seconds. An seems to have been on the same level as James Bond, perhaps even Joshua Newton, but he was just too much of a wuss to put those skills to use. Everyone applauds as Yee-Jae finally brings a psycho to justice, including the internet where he's gone viral. And the next thing you know, he's promoting a bunch of offshore casinos. Anyway, the police catches wind of Yee-Jae's incredible performance and asks quite the question.
야, 저는 저 최근에 생명보험 들었는지 확인해.
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 It's funny to think On has been such a loser that the only way anyone would believe he's changed is if he's ready to die. Anyway, we then get to see Yee-Jae and Chad drive over to the sadistic painter's studio while Park is getting a hard-on by replaying the murder in his head. He then invites his secretary on a date to the studio with the most ominous inflection anyone could have pulled. Yee-Jae arrives first, however, and collects the necessary evidence alongside the fountain pen. This may be tampering with the crime scene, but considering who Park is, I doubt the justice system would actually do its job. Park soon arrives, only to find the building surrounded by police. He's stopped and confronted by Yee-Jae, who uses this chance to rage bait a little more. This probably feels exceptionally good, considering the last time these two interacted. Anxious, Park speeds off, even leaving his secretary stranded in the middle of the road. He then intently watches the news as they glaze the fuck out of Yee-Jae before receiving a call. I'm pretty sure this was James Bond's boss, and he's promised to take care of Detective Soy. This dude over here is also so stiff, I thought he was a statue. Meanwhile, Yee-Jae hands over the evidence directly to a news station, who promises to air it as an exclusive tonight. He is just on a roll. As Yee-Jae speaks to the rest regarding the evidence, he spots his mother, of all people, arriving at the police station, and apparently this isn't her first visit. She's being investigated due to the mysterious bag of money found in her apartment, which she turned in on account of just being suspicious. Her luck then grew worse when the police learned that the person who delivered that money had later died. After putting 2 and 4 together, they came to the conclusion that she had something to do with his death. Yee-Jae has just accidentally ruined her life again. He decides to speak with her, calmly, a reconnection, even going as far as tying her shoes.
끈 풀려서 넘어지면 다치실 수 있어요. 앞으로는 꼭 끈 없는 신발 신으세요.
우리 아들이 처음 사준 신발이에요.
Clearly, his mother is still hurting, and she has been every single day since the loss of her son. And she'll even go as far as to inconvenience herself so long as it feels like her son is still with her. She also mentioned why she couldn't accept the money, because it felt like a punishment. It felt like the gods telling her, good job on sending your son to us, here is your reward. Not to mention the value of her family, of life, cannot simply be bought for any amount. Quite the heroic stance, especially in this economy, where literally anybody would do almost anything for money. Yee-Jae's mother returns home one day to find a bag of groceries and a little note left behind by the man creepily staring at her from the other side. How she didn't see him, I have no clue. And as Yee-Jae makes his way out of the building, hoping she'll at least accept this gesture, he's stopped by Two-Face, who wastes no time in stabbing him. We then cut back to Park, who seems to still be in a state of slight distress due to the documents he's discovered. An article regarding the deaths of Lee and Zhang, with a photo taken at the absolute perfect angle showing both perpetrators. Park angrily confronts his father once he arrives, demanding to know why he's gathering evidence against his own son, though his father simply questions what son. His only son died, after all. This angers Park so much that he stops some random dude on the street, kills him, then goes to church to mock God for calling himself a quote-unquote savior, for claiming to be the only one who can pass judgment. Yet, Park has just passed judgment on some random dude, and God was nowhere to be found. At that moment, he gets a call from the station, notifying him of the videos Yee-Jae has delivered to the press. And so, he calls the gang leader, wondering if the job's been done. However, Yee-Jae answers the phone. Because Two-Face didn't stab him, On's reaction time was just so legendary that Yee-Jae caught the karambit before it hit him. Deadass, that's actually a karambit, and one with the default skin. Soon, we see Park use his connections to set up a meeting between the two. He seems to have reached a dead end, and attempts to solve this in the only way he knows how, by offering Yee-Jae quite literally anything he wants. But he refuses, because he won't stop until Park either arrives at rock bottom or is buried there. He then leaves, and another lawyer steps in to transition into Plan B, which only needs one final call. Yee-Jae intently watches the news report, waiting for that moment, but instead of airing the video, the anchorman reveals some breaking news. Park Tae-yu will turn himself in for the murder of Jang Gyu-chol. He steps out of the police station into a flood of reporters and flashing lights and admits to his crime. He has taken the life of not just a man, but a serial killer who had tortured and killed 15 other victims. Although his recount of events are true, he spins the narrative to make it sound as though he was acting in self-defense and doing a service to society. And many believe this, even if he lacks a proper answer as to what happened to the body, instead insinuating that Jang actually survived and is still out there. And to end it off, he offers his sincerest apologies. The anchorman then transitions into the footage of Jang's death, which is only 3 seconds long and shows him dragging Park Park into the studio. It cuts from there. And the cherry on top, Taekong threatened to retaliate if a single negative article was shared by pulling their advertisements. Pearl's got a media team out here like the monkeys from Superman. Park has successfully won this battle and will now take a little victory trip to the States, where I'm sure he'll be welcomed as a hero by our completely innocent and incredibly well put together and functioning government. The general scolds Yee-Jae for fabricating evidence, but he refuses to stand down. I mean, after all, if he doesn't win in this life, he'll sure as hell do so in the next. He has nothing to fear, which is why he's kidnapped 10 seconds later. Park happily pops some pills, lies down, and takes a serene nap, knowing he is and will always be untouchable.
Turbulence! A whole bunch of turbulence! Everybody strap your seatbelts!
Park grows worried, even more so when an ominous voice speaks to him, reminding him of just a couple of his many victims. We also learned that in order to cover up his brother's death, he offered 3 billion won to the skydiver earlier, knowing he'd die on the air and take over the internet for a good while. Park rushes into the cockpit, only to find it empty and the plane on autopilot. The anonymous voice then leaves him with one final message: this plane will explode in 30 seconds, but he can still survive if he finds the parachute he so gracefully left for him. With only seconds to spare, he does, but there's hardly any time to put it on. Park rushes to equip it during his freefall, and unfortunately lands safely, narrowly avoiding the same fate that awaited his brother. The driver is none other than Yee-Jae. He was never once in danger, let alone afraid that Park outsmarted him. In fact, he expected this to happen, and had already devised the plan B, putting together the skills of all of his previous lives to lead them both here. With the help of Park's brother, he knew how to swap the sleeping pills. With the help of James Bond, he retrieved all of the relevant evidence. And with the help of the skydiver, he skydived, and I guess also knew how to pilot a plane. And with the help of Cho, he knew how to drive, I guess. By the way, the person they kidnapped was some random guy. I have no idea who this is, where Yee-Jae found him, or how the other twos didn't realize, but I digress. And although it looked like it at first, I'm pretty sure former Detective Chad here and Yee-Jae's boss were actually trying to save him, only to get confused because he wasn't even there to begin with. Originally, I thought they were the ones that kidnapped him. Even better, while Park was asleep, he sent the proper evidence to news sites all over, and many of them aired it without hesitation. Yee-Jae then carefully puts on his gloves, gets on his knees, and slowly suffocates Park, emotionless, wanting nothing more than for him to die a painful death. Death, seeing her rules being broken, shows herself. She slowly approaches them, ready to dish out the most severe of punishments, but Yee-Jae refuses to stop, not until they arrive at hell together. He suddenly stops. He can't go through with this. It won't change the past, and Lee had sincerely wished for him to find a happy ending. How could he possibly break her heart again? And so, he leaves Park there to suffer on his own, while Death returns to her office. And now, Yee-Jae wonders what he's even meant to do from here. I'm not joking, that's actually where the episode ends. Now, while this episode was a really cool watch and pretty hype, I do still have many issues with it. The biggest one being that this, alongside the last 2 episodes, feels so disconnected from the rest of the story. Like, why are we including a Batman-esque villain subplot in a story that's meant to focus on the intricacies of death? Honestly, the best parts of this episode were the moments between Yee-Jae and his mother, alongside the final moment there between him and Park, because that's the story I came for. And perhaps this is a bit of a nitpick, but I don't really like it when the viewers get an entire rundown of what just happened at the climax of a huge moment. Like, please, at least wait until the resolution to exposition dump. Don't just toss it right in the middle. And almost nothing that was explained was foreshadowed. Like, Park popping pills, yes, so it's a bit understandable that he cluelessly gets tricked into taking sleeping pills. But this hard drive that contained all the evidence, we didn't see that from James Bond. It just came out of nowhere. The imposter? Who the fuck is this guy? Where did Yee-Jae even get explosives? I will give them credit though. I did originally think that Yee-Jae just sent that evidence to basically everybody and they all just decided to air it for whatever reason, but it actually looks like he used the skydiver's personal YouTube channel and then people reported on that. Why didn't he do that in the first place? I don't know. Maybe he either is stupid or he really wanted to just drag out Park's fear. Like, it's all a bunch of bullshit that were presented at a pivotal moment when our minds are attempting to focus on the outcome as opposed to the intricacy of the build-up. And while it feels great in the moment, afterwards it kind of just leaves you with either a sour taste or an underwhelming memory of those scenes. It doesn't become as memorable as it should be, unless you really only cared about Bro getting ran over by a truck. I also want to mention that while I think Oh Jung-se gave a great performance as Yee-Jae / An Ji-hyung, it still doesn't feel like the character we've been following. It doesn't feel like Choi Yee-Jae, but instead a completely original character who was written for this one specific arc. Again, I'm not saying he's a bad actor or his performance was poor. I just don't feel as though it was right in terms of character work, if you know what I mean. I didn't include this in the commentary, but there were also so many times where former Detective Chad or Yee-Jae's boss continuously like wondered if this is the same person they've been working with the entire time, only for none of it to have like any sort of payoff whatsoever. And it just occurred to me while editing this video that the person who An was basically swapped out for in the kidnapping was actually the second person who kidnapped him. And the way I figured this out was by looking at the 3 frames where his face was actually on screen. That is all you see of this guy. So can you really blame me for not realizing who he was? And now I'm actually convinced that Yee-Jae's boss and former Detective Chad were the ones that essentially ordered the kidnapping, which is why they were surprised that it wasn't An. Anyways, I'm just going to rate this episode a solid 6.5 scores out of 10, which might be a bit of a hot take, seeing as how this is actually the second highest rated episode on IMDB. We open this episode in an interrogation room where we see Yee-Jae confront Park's former lawyer. He clearly no longer wants to serve his time, seeing as how his client is now completely cooked. But of course, he can't wiggle his way out of this situation, at least not without the help of the SD card he had thrown away earlier.
이거 기억나? 이게 네 무죄를 입증할 유일한 증거잖아? 감사합니다.
Yeah, bro literally just went there to rage bait. What a giga Chad. We then cut back to a press report, presumably from the police station, calling for the arrest of Park Tae-yu alongside the officers who aided in covering up the truth. Park's father has also stepped down from his position as CEO, possibly because of how embarrassing this situation is. The first to visit Park at the hospital is Yee-Jae, who reminds him that God kept him alive so he can experience true suffering. And he doesn't mean just socially, but also physically, because his legs had to be amputated and he'll most likely never regain full control of his remaining body. Yee-Jae then goes to visit Lee's memorial, perhaps something he wants to start as a tradition, seeing as how he's accomplished his quote-unquote life mission. Without anything to really chase after, Yee-Jae has decided to live the remainder of his life as the newly crowned detective Giga Chad. We cut to a small montage where we can see Yee-Jae essentially living out some fucking James Bond film alongside Detective Dickhead, which I still can't believe is around after literally kidnapping him, but whatever, I guess Yee-Jae never actually met his kidnappers. It's also in the hospital after a turbulent case that we get to meet Detective D's family, who I'm sure would be ecstatic to hear about how little it takes to buy their father/husband. Anyway, it's at this moment that Yee-Jae realizes that there's nobody that really cares about him, at least not in the same way as Detective D's family cares about him, not to mention he's not even himself anymore. And that leads him to make a promise he must uphold, especially for the sake of Detective D's daughter, that he'll do everything it takes to protect him. Sorry, I just had to. Yee-Jae knows his life is dispensable, and so he rushes into action, soaking up bullets like a sponge and ultimately throws himself and the criminal over the ledge, killing only him because the criminal luckily landed on some boxes. It's clear to see that Death stepped in as he was close to killing another human. Upon waking up in the Borderlands, Death reveals that that was part of it, but she was also upset that he attempted to kill himself again, even if it meant saving another life. Yee-Jae finds this quite annoying. Why is he being scolded for saving someone? How could she be mad that he's done something actually heroic? Isn't that the point of the game? To value life? He just valued someone's life over his own, didn't he? Is he not a hero? Def replies with only a simple question. Who exactly do you think you are? And without wasting any more time, she sends him straight to his next life, this time as a very obvious homeless man, sitting in the middle of a bridge. As Yee-Jae strolls around, blissfully unaware of his own presence, he spots many news reports regarding the heroic death of Detective An Ji-hyung, as well as honoring his work in bringing down Park Tae-yu, with his funeral being held at Taikang Hospital's funeral hall. Pretty shitty to put him there, but I guess I can only assume they own like every single funeral hall in the country. Regardless, Yee-Jae decides to pay himself a visit. Might as well honor his own achievements while he's here. He casually strolls through the hall, amazed just how many people offered their condolences to him, including Dee's family, who he spots mourning. Alright girl, calm down. Could you be a little nicer? Don't take after your father now. Dee's family move over to the dining room, where Yee-Jae spots his former colleagues reminiscing about their time with An. I still can't believe this dude has a job, but whatever. But as Yee-Jae stares at them like a creep, another man spots him and berates him for attempting to get a free meal. And when he denies such a claim, he's rushed out of the building for smelling like shit. Because clearly, he hasn't been using Old Spice, which is the sponsor of today's video. Yee-Jae's former boss spots him and hands him a bag of leftovers, or quite literally poison. It's actually kind of hard to tell. And then he gets everyone to leave Yee-Jae alone. There's no need to be a dickhead today of all days. Yee-Jae seems quite offended. After everything he's done for them, for the whole world, for society, all he's rewarded with is a bag of dog shit and contemptible looks from those who are at the same time honoring him. Annoyed, he decides it's just better to leave. However, he's pushed right back inside by a swarm of bodyguards and journalists, all of whom are here to escort/interview the Prime Minister, who has arrived to honor the late detective. Yee-Jae attempts to leave through an alternate exit, only to run into Detective D, who is mourning the loss of his partner in the middle of a staircase. Yee-Jae grabs his attention and attempts to offer words of encouragement, disguised as someone else, of course. However, this quickly turns sour as D refuses to accept such empty words from a man neither of them have ever even seen before. In fact, how dare such a low-life scum even speak about An as though he was a friend? D angrily asks a concerning question. Who do you think you are? And in that moment, a certain truth dawns upon Yee-Jae, that no matter what he does, no matter who he might save, no matter what he may accomplish, none of it matters. Because he wasn't the heir to a multi-billion-dollar company. He wasn't a skilled and renowned skydiver. He wasn't a high schooler who flipped the status quo on a notorious bully. He wasn't a skillful assassin. He wasn't a talented fighter. He wasn't a model. He wasn't a talented artist. He wasn't a heroic detective. And he isn't even the homeless man we see before us. Choi Yee-Jae was a kid who, after failing an interview, spiraled into a sea of poor decisions and unfortunate circumstances that left him with no other choice but to end his own life. That's all we and everyone will ever know him as, regardless of what face or body he may have in the current moment. He'll never relish in the accomplishments of past lives because they're just simply not his, and he has no right to claim them as such. It was so easy for Yee-Jae to lose himself in these personalities simply because he's trying his absolute hardest to forget his original life, attempting to stuff his own memories away, hoping they just all turn into bad thoughts. But by doing so, he's also throwing away his identity, his own self. And if he discards Choi Yee-Jae, then who exactly is he? Well, the answer is quite simple. He'd be nobody. Nothing. It's now that Yee-Jae fully regrets his actions, not because of the people he's unintentionally hurt, but because he's come to realize that he'll never get to truly live again. He'll be nothing more than a ghost simply buying himself time before being sent to the afterlife. And it's at this point that the memory crystal finally decides to appear. But Yee-Jae wants nothing to do with it, and as he hurries to avoid it, he trips and falls to his death. And with that, life number 10 has come to an end. He confronts Death for making a fool of him. Hell, was Detective D even meant to die on that rooftop, or did he just kill himself for nothing? However, Death doesn't answer this question, because she doesn't need to. They both know that none of this really matters anymore. So much so that Yee-Jae just wants to hurry up and get the game over with. All he has to do is die 2 more times, right?
멍청한 놈.
Yee-Jae suddenly finds himself in the middle of an alleyway, in the body of a white-collar worker. He sighs, drops his suitcase, and runs full speed ahead into oncoming traffic, at the same time as a familiar man emerges from the subway. The memory races to catch up with Yee-Jae, though nothing he sees is really enough to stop him from accomplishing his goal. He blindly speeds through the street, accidentally bumping into a young and well-dressed man, and lets himself be hit by an unfortunately distracted driver. Yee-Jae is sent flying towards the curb. He's a bloody mess, traumatizing those around him, though nobody more than the young man he bumped into only seconds ago, who gets on his knees and attempts to keep him conscious. Yee-Jae glances at the man, surprise and regret washing over him. He then turns to the man who had just hit him, perhaps a bit of anger swelling inside of him, and then Death approaches, who he looks at with remorse. He desperately asks her to help him, wanting to redo the situation he's just put himself in, and the driver seems to mistake this as a cry for help, or perhaps a plea to a god. Yee-Jae then turns back to the young man, his time running out. He extends an arm, the man nervously takes it, and Yee-Jae uses this chance to cling onto him in his final moments. This sickening memory unfortunately follows the young man into his life-changing interview, and with that, life number 11 comes to an end. Yee-Jae wakes up yet again, annoyed, as Death laughs in his face. She quite literally just gave him the chance to redo everything, to turn back the clock and fix his entire life, and yet he blew it in less than 5 minutes. Humans simply do not recognize an opportunity even if it's handed to them on a silver platter. And now comes the final shot, the most painful life Yee-Jae will ever experience. He stands, looks Death in the eyes, and boldly states that death is merely a means of ending the pain I'm in. He's essentially refusing to back down, since that's all he can really do at this point, go down with some dignity, or at least a bit of fight. He even reminds her that no matter what body he ends up in, he'll bring it to an end immediately, so that he can finally and truly put an end to his life. But Death doubts that will happen.
엄마?
A memory crystal emerges from the glass and dives straight into the terrified Yee-Jae's head. It's now that he learns the truth behind the woman who's raised him after all these years. How she was just a regular girl, one who dreamed big and fought to achieve such a life, and who would later start a family with the man she loved, only for life to throw her the first heartbreak when her husband tragically passed away, while Yee-Jae was only a child. Even through some of the most challenging times, especially for a single mother, she forced herself to keep fighting for the sake of her son, only for that to go wrong as well. On that fateful day, she gave Yee-Jae a call, hoping her soothing words would calm the everlasting ache in his heart, but he never answered. He couldn't have. She hurried to get dressed, desperate to check on her son, only to receive the worst phone call one could have imagined before even stepping out of the room. To have to see your own son in that state, to have to know he's gone, to have to know you're now entirely alone is a pain unfathomable for even the strongest of mothers, let alone human beings. It forces you to blame yourself for not doing something sooner, for not trying harder to pull him out of the hole he was stuck inside of. Yee-Jae finally understands what Death has been trying to get him to see this entire time. What her entire purpose was for creating this twisted game, to explain how death is contagious. It is not and never will be a painless act. It will never be the end of anything, because the death of someone and their memories will continue on in those who love them, those who choose to keep on living. Yee-Jae also understands that the most painful death of all wasn't burning alive, or falling thousands of feet from the air, or being beaten, or stabbed, or suffocated, or even being torn limb from limb. The worst death of them all, and the worst punishment he could receive, was having to patiently wait for death to find him, while he lived knowing and feeling the heartbreaking pain of the person he cared about and loved the most. Of course, if Yee-Jae wanted to, he could have just ended it and been done with this, but he decided not to. He's decided to punish himself for the pain he's caused by living out as much of his life as he could, regardless of how difficult it was. He even decided to take a hike, fulfilling a small dream his mother had as a sort of apology, hoping she'd forgive him wherever she is now, if only she were here. But on the way back, he trips and injures himself to the point he wonders if this will be the end. But it wasn't. Instead, he wakes up at a hospital, already treated for, and strangely, he thanks the heavens for keeping him alive, for keeping his mother alive. And when remembering how caring his mother had been and hearing the desperate words she spoke to him, Yee-Jae breaks down into tears, wishing he could be born again as her son, just one more time and redo everything he's done wrong. Yee-Jae lived as his mother for a total of 32 years, ironically longer than he lived as himself. It's in these final moments that he comes to a certain conclusion, that one cannot say they are living if it's in constant fear, whether that's fear of being rejected, or botching an interview, or feeling as though you're falling behind. It was that fear that led him to where he is now. For all he knew, the flower could have only started blossoming, but he plucked it as soon as he thought it was a lost cause. As Yee-Jae looked upon the meadow, gazing at the beautiful sunset, he took a gentle breath and calmly fell into a deep sleep. And with that, the game is finally over. He wakes up yet again at the entrance to hell and comes face to face with death. He couldn't believe how happy he was to see her again. Quite a long time has passed after all, and in that time he also thought about what he should say if he were to come face to face with her. And so he gets on his knees and begs her to shoot him again, just one last time. But death has already run out of bullets, and he understands that, and yet he still begs. He just wants one more chance as Choi Yee-Jae. Death asks why he should even be given said chance after everything he's already done and said, and what he's even going to do if he gets it. Yee-Jae has only one answer.
엄마를 다시 한번 안아드리고 싶어요.
Death calmly reminds him of the game, and that he's beaten her by playing by the rules she's set forth. He managed to avoid death and survive until she herself came to retrieve him. He's received his punishment from her, and now she'll leave it up to chance to decide what happens from here. She loads just one more bullet into a revolver and spins the chamber. Yee-Jae has only one chance to get what he's begging for, and if the gun doesn't fire, his life will officially be over. Yee-Jae takes the gun and points it at himself. With all his heart, he begs to be shot.
엄마.
And with that, Death's game has come to an end. Please hand in your worksheets, I'll be passing them back around at random, and I'd like for each of you to write a response to at least 5 of your classmates. Jokes aside, I combined both episodes 7 and 8 since they were both quite short and because it led to an incredible ending. Now, there are 4 major things I want to discuss here, with the first being what the ending actually means. Personally, I believe there are 2 ways to interpret this. The first being that Death has sent Yee-Jae back to that fateful day. She's given him the chance he so desperately wanted to change the most impactful decision of his life, and he graciously took it. After all, we've seen how she has the power to just send him to completely different points in time, so it wouldn't be surprising if she put him back in his original body. This does leave a bit of questions though, such as, does this mean that Park Tae-yoo is still at large with 0 consequences for his actions? And will the deaths and lives of all these people just play out as normal? And that's when the second interpretation comes in. There's a chance that everything we've just seen, everything Yee-Jae has experienced, was never real. It all happened in his head in those couple of seconds where he stood on the ledge and contemplated whether or not to jump. I mean, we saw bits of him just standing there for prolonged periods of time, almost looking as though he were in a daze. And come on, Satan giving people a second chance in general seems a bit odd if I say so myself. And Park Tae-yoo was never in the original scene where the man was hit, despite being seen later on. There's a chance that Yee-Jae interpreted him as the quote-unquote quote-unquote villain of his life after being basically humiliated in the job interview and still not receiving it. That entire revenge arc could have just stemmed from his hatred towards Tae-kang. Essentially, this interpretation leads us to believe that Yee-Jae convinced himself that death wasn't the way to go, because there are others dealing with far worse fates, and the pain he'll inevitably leave behind isn't worth the simple feeling of peace. Personally, I like to gravitate more towards the second interpretation, because then it means a serial killer isn't on the loose and Yee-Jae didn't need someone to show him that death wasn't the answer, even if this makes the entire story a little less worthwhile. But without a concrete answer, every viewer is allowed to come to their own conclusion. However, one thing is for certain. From here on out, Yee-Jae will continue to power through the hardships and challenges that define life, only this time taking into consideration his past mistakes, and with far more respect and love for those around him, so he could be an overall better man, boyfriend, possibly father, and son. The second topic I want to discuss is the overall story. This show is quite literally eye-opening, a show that helped me better understand the value of life. Sure, there were some hiccups here and there, most of them having to do with Park Tae-yu's entire character, but it was never enough to distract me from the main purpose. Hell, even Park's arc had a message, that being to never allow revenge to just simply overtake your life, because the consequences of which are not worth it. And every actor in this show did an incredible job at portraying this singular character, Choi Yee-Jae, a broken man who just wanted to live a fruitful life only to find himself in more pain than ever before. Though I will admit, it was a bit annoying to see him have to come to the exact same conclusion multiple times in this show, only to revert back to himself until like the very end. Like, did bro not have learned his lesson the first 11 times? Death was also portrayed incredibly, a merciless entity that fully expected Yee-Jae to go through this game without learning anything, because perhaps it's happened many times before. But when he did, she showed him a bit of respect, at least as much as she could muster, and gave him the opportunity he asked for, because she knew at that point that he would not take it for granted again. But I will admit, one of the main issues is that this entire show kind of feels littered with filler. Like, although there were 8 episodes spanning about 7 to 8 hours worth of content, there was honestly a lot less to talk about than Night Has Come, for example, which spanned about the same or a little bit less than this one. It felt like the real story was only 4 or 5 episodes long, so they just keep front loading it with a bunch of just useless scenes or scenes that drag out for far too long. Which is why overall I will give Death's Game a solid 8.5 out of 10. I don't want to give it an 8 because I don't think it is simply above average. I think it is getting near that perfect echelon. But I also cannot give it a 9 or a 10 because, as I said, there were a lot of hiccups, too much filler, and honestly I really do feel like this series could have been shortened by a lot. I also want to make a little tier list of lives, going from absolute worst to best in terms of difficulty and survivability. So, beginning in first place, we have the baby. Literally 0 chance at survival thanks to demonic parents. In second place, we have Jung Kyu-chol, the sadistic painter. He could have lived a long and successful life, seeing as how he wasn't even a suspect 15 victims later. Hell, he probably made enough money with those 15 that he could live the rest of his life just doing nothing. However, he had terminal cancer, which took his life far sooner than he could have imagined. In third place, we have the homeless man. Could have possibly lived just a bit longer than Jung Kyu-chol through sheer willpower, but would have died of a disease at some point. In fourth place, we have Song Jae-sub, the skydiver, and I think we know why. In fifth place, we have Kwon Hyuk-soo. Although his life could have been easily lived through by simply following orders, I think we've seen enough to understand that his bullies would have probably killed him at some point, even if by accident. And with Yee-Jae's constant backtop, it could have happened even sooner. In sixth place, we have Lee Joo-hun, otherwise known as James Bond. This man may have had some crazy skills and probably a shitload of money, but his lifestyle was ridiculously dangerous. So even if not by that girl, I'm sure he would have been killed in either a chase or by someone else, perhaps Joshua Newton. In seventh place, we have Choi Yee-Jae's mother, who's suffering through immense pain already, both physically and mentally, and the loss of her son didn't help. The only reason she died was because of circumstances beyond her control, and no matter how strong someone may be, they can't bear to live a life this tragic. In eighth place, we have Cho Tae-sung. Could have honestly avoided death by not taking the bribe or demanding more money, though I will admit he was thrown into a corner. He did have have the skills to save himself though, and he only died because he was caught off guard. In 9th place, we have An Ji-hyung, or Detective Soy / Gigachad. His life was pretty chill, mainly because he was a coward. If he had gotten quite literally any other job, he would have been perfectly fine, but even then, he still had the skills to keep himself going, and it was pretty honorable of him to follow in his father's footsteps. However, due to the nature of his job, he would die on duty, and I'm pretty sure he did in his own life. In 10th place, we have Park Jin-tae, Taeyu's brother. Bro was living it up, and easily could have survived if he jumped out of the plane sooner, or if he took his brother's threats to heart and never boarded it in the first place. In 11th place, we have the office worker. Could have literally just looked for another job and fought through the pain of divorce, but decided to just end it all. And Yee-Jae could have lived along with this one, but was unfortunately too stressed to keep going. In 12th place, we have Choi Yee-Jae himself. He still had people that cared about him, even when he was at his worst, and his world was crashing down. If only he had listened to them, instead of arriving at his own negative conclusions. And finally, in last place, comes Jang Gun-yu, the model. Literally lived the best life he could from childhood. I deadass don't even know how he died, and I'm sure the writers couldn't figure out how to kill such a perfect man either. Since Yee-Jae spawned in the middle of the street, we can assume he was hit by a car, but who knows how avoidable it really was. Anyways, the third topic I want to discuss has to do with Yee-Jae's mother. We get to see firsthand just how difficult her life has been, and how Yee-Jae has been taking far too much advantage of her. I mean, you can't really blame him, because it's difficult for us as children to understand the actual pain and suffering our parents have gone through just to give us the life we have. This episode honestly spoke to me personally because of how significant it is in my own life. Guys, real talk, I'm an immigrant from Peru, and so were my parents. They were born in a small little town out in the middle of the mountains, and came here with only enough money to get to the Bay Area. In retrospect, could have chosen a better spot, but oh well. My dad's first job was a janitor, making only $400 a month, while my mom worked at like a Jamba Juice. All the while, they couldn't even see me because I was still back in Peru. I didn't move here until I was like 3 years old. Anyway, time passes. My parents have both been living in this country for like 30 years now, and in that time, they faced countless of hardship, many of which I'm sure I still don't even know about. Like, it took quite some time for me to realize what they were really going through, and why they did things that, while I personally didn't like, I knew they did just to ease the constant stress that plagues their mind. Thankfully, I didn't have to be reincarnated as either of them to understand it, but my point is, don't take your parents for granted. I know it's a privilege view I have here, but to those of you that can relate, then please, at the very least, give your parents a hug, because you can never predict when the last time you'll get to see them is. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to discuss is the message regarding suicide. Perhaps it's not my place to say this, but I believe Death's Game really shows how it is one of the most selfish acts a human being can carry out. You are throwing your life away because you no longer want to be around to face the consequences. Regardless of how you feel, you need to understand that life is not just a simple and straightforward path for everyone. Life is made up of an endless number of days, many good but also many just as bad, and it becomes very easy to just focus on the worst because they make the most and lasting impacts. But hardships are what makes a person who they are, what creates the foundation for success. But if you don't build atop that foundation, if you don't go out there and fight for what you really want and instead decide you're never getting it, then what's the point? If, God forbid, that fateful day ever comes and you're sitting there contemplating whether or not to go through with it, I want you to imagine something. Just take a second to imagine how the people in your life will feel once you're gone. How your parents, your friends, your co-workers, just imagine the pain they might go through upon realizing of your fate. If you can ignore said pain, if you can ignore the inevitable suffering they'll go through, then go ahead. Nobody is stopping you because nobody can. I am not shy to admit, I have felt like Yee-Jae from time to time. Hell, I can lie and say I took a hiatus from YouTube because I was burned out, but the truth was far deeper than that. Life hit me with the greatest combo it could dish out, and not one I could parry. The views were going down, I lost pretty much every friend I had, all the while my family, my mother, uncles, aunts, grandparents, were constantly reminding me of how badly I was wasting my life with this quote-unquote stupid career. Except my dad, he was at least understanding. I respect almost everyone's opinion, including those who have negative ones. It was just really unfortunate that the only people left in my life were the ones with negative opinions. How do you think that affects someone like me? Someone who's always wondered where their place in life was, or felt he needed to live up to ginormous expectations. What's even worse is that nobody really knows this about me because I don't tell anyone. I don't really think anyone would care since they have their own shit to focus focus on. So I quite literally speak as someone who is alone. And yet, despite being alone, despite having to force myself to work a job I hate, despite having to force a smile a lot of the times, despite having almost nothing, I still carry on. Because I know that I'll never get to see the good if I can't power through the worst. I live life hoping that someday everything I'm fighting for, everything I'm attempting to achieve will be worth it. And perhaps be petty to those who didn't believe in me, I'm still working at the details. I know this is a hard mindset to build, but it is possible. Literally, if someone as lazy as me can do it, so can you. It just takes time, baby steps. Nothing can be achieved overnight, so don't even try. If you're in a similar situation, I'm here with you. We'll fight through this shit we call life together. Neither of us should give up, because whether it's in 1 month, 1 year, 1 decade, good is waiting for us at the finish line. We just have to keep going, even if it means walking the rest of the way. Anyways, that's all I really have for this video. If you liked it enough to get this far, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. Sorry I've been gone for so long, guys. As I mentioned, shit just happens. I'm sure I've lost all credibility at this point, but I hope you guys can come to forgive me, and I hope to make things up with future videos and projects. I do have a couple of ideas that I would like to work on, and I'm confident at least 2 of them won't take as long as this video did, but it kind of really depends on how well this video does, because as much as I like you guys, and as much as I like making this video, I'm also an adult now, literally on status at 21 years old. I have bills to pay, and if YouTube isn't enough, then I have to go somewhere else. And on a completely unrelated note, I've almost completed the manuscript to the book I mentioned not too long ago. I think in my last video, in fact. It's honestly insane to me to think that I was able to complete an entire novel and story all on my own. I just hope karma holds off a little bit longer and my shit does not get reviewed as badly as I did with Night Has Come. Whenever it was that I mentioned it, I saw some people like suggesting that I should just upload it to places like AO3 or Wattpad or whatever. But honestly, I'm hoping for a traditional publishing because I honestly just want to do nothing but write. I don't want to have to worry about everything else. Anyways, there's not really much else to say besides thank you guys so much for watching, and here's to hopefully the next video, which will maybe come out at the end of this month. As I said, it all depends on how this video does. Anyways, that's all. Ciao ciao.